Chapter 2677. Marshal Dong had cultivated for 6,000 years to reach his current level of strength. He had spent his entire life fighting for the heaven-slaying tribe to expand their territory and reach his current status. Ever since he had reached LV6 True God Realm, he had not broken through for 700 years. He knew that without a great opportunity, it would be difficult for him to increase his strength in the future. As for ascending to the upper realm and reaching the Heaven God Realm, he did not even dare to think about it. Ji Tianqing, who was standing in front of him, was his greatest opportunity. If he could kill Suemo, he would be able to obtain great wealth. He would even have the chance to increase his strength and reach the Heaven God Realm. Marshal Dong felt his blood boil at the thought of this. He was so excited that his body trembled. Although he knew that Ji Tianqing was powerful, he was not weak. However, he wasn't a weakling either. He had over 100 heaven-defying martial gods by his side. No matter what, he could easily kill Ji Tianqing. There would be no accidents. Ji Tianqing's eyes were sharp and vicious. How could he not know what Marshal Dong was thinking? He immediately sneered and said in a mocking tone, "It seems that the heaven-slaying great emperor only told you that you could obtain power and wealth by killing me. He did not tell you that I beat him up and he ran away with serious injuries. If you knew about this, you would not be so optimistic." Marshal Dong felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he heard this. He was petrified. He was so shocked that he was dumbfounded. His body stiffened as he stared at Ji Tianqing. After a while he came to his senses and shouted instinctively, "Bullsh**t. Ji Tianqing, don't you dare deceive us with your lies. Who do you think our great emperor is? He has reached the limit of the true God realm and is a half-step heaven god. He is invincible in the universe. You are just a lowly human. How dare you compare yourself to our great emperor? Today, Ben Shui will kill you on the spot and expose your ridiculous lies." Marshal Dong naturally hadn't heard of this and didn't believe Ji Tianqing's words. Even if he had some doubts in his heart, he had to show contempt and disdain and deny this matter. Otherwise, Great Emperor Tianfa would be utterly humiliated. While roaring, the east-conquering marshal wielded his pair of blades with a murderous aura, hacking down towards Ji Tianqing. Swoosh! Swish! The dazzling purple blade of light locked onto Ji Tianqing's divine sense and slashed toward him with the power to split heaven and earth. He couldn't dodge, so he could only try to block or neutralize it. Between heaven and earth, a murderous aura suddenly surged, and purple light filled the sky. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, looked indifferent. He casually swung the burial of heaven. Shua! A dazzling golden sword projection over 10,000 feet in length swept through the air with boundless divine might before striking the two purple light blades head-on. With two loud bangs, the two purple light blades collapsed on the spot, turning into fragments that scattered all over the sky. However, the golden sword light was still intact, and its power did not decrease as it slashed towards Marshal Zhendong. Marshal Zhendong's face suddenly changed. His eyes flashed with a strong sense of surprise, and he subconsciously waved his two swords to slash. Bang! With a muffled sound, the dazzling golden sword light was shattered, and golden fragments scattered all over the sky. However, Marshal Zhendong was knocked back by the impact. He tumbled and crashed into the crowd 10 miles away. More than a dozen martial gods exclaimed as they hurried over to catch Marshal Zhendong. Bang! Bang! The violent impact caused everyone to be thrown off their feet, and thrown off their feet. Marshal Zhendong didn't even have time to tidy up his clothes. He roared angrily, "You bastards, what are you waiting for? Kill him for Ben Shui." The dozen martial gods came back to their senses and answered in unison. They swung their swords at Ji Tianqing. At the same time, Ji Wuhen and Ji Wushuang also swung their divine swords and slashed out overwhelming sword light. One sword light chills 19 states. Moonless mystic light sword. It was as if a beam of sword light had come from the sky. It carried a brilliant divine might and slashed into the crowd with a force that could split open the sky. Ji Wushuang unleashed 18 crescent-shaped sword lights that enveloped more than a dozen martial gods. Her movements were light and elegant, and the sword light was gorgeous. It was quite pleasing to the eye. However, the sword technique was extremely powerful. After a series of muffled noises, the dozen or so martial gods were knocked back. A few of them were not injured, But the other dozen martial gods were in trouble. Not only were their armors cracked, but there were also hideous wounds on their bodies. Purple blood spurted out. Some of them were in the worst condition. Their limbs were chopped off. Two of the martial gods were standing at the front. They were chopped into pieces by the sword light and died on the spot. Marshal Zhendong's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He was both furious and shocked. He simply couldn't believe it. It was one thing for Ji Tianqing to be so powerful, but even the two children beside him had such terrifying combat strength. At this moment he finally understood why Ji Tianqing dared to come here. Marshal Zhendong's confidence started to crumble. A hint of worry appeared in his heart. He had a bad premonition. It was hard to predict the outcome of this battle. However, at this point he would not be afraid or back down. He swung his two swords again and charged at Ji Tianqing. Sky-shattering strike. Marshal Zhendong shouted angrily. He swung his two swords and unleashed hundreds of purple light beams that charged at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing put his left hand behind his back. He swung the Burial of Heaven sword with his right hand and counterattacked calmly. Sun-shattering sword. The Burial of Heaven sword stabbed out 36 times in an instant and hit the hundreds of purple light beams. Crack, crack, crack. In the blink of an eye, the hundreds of purple light beams collapsed. There were still 24 golden sword lights left, but they were still powerful. They enveloped Marshal Zhendong. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of muffled sounds, Marshal Zhendong was hit 24 times. He screamed and flew back. The black armor and golden cloak he was wearing had been torn apart by the sword light. A dozen bone-deep wounds were left on his dark purple body. Blood gushed out. Marshal Zhendong flew back for more than 10 miles and crashed into the crowd. The few captains in golden armor who were casting spells to attack the spirit tribe elder and the divine elephant immediately staggered and cried out in surprise. Marshal Zhendong was extremely embarrassed and angry. He hurriedly got up and rushed towards Ji Tianqing without thinking about his own safety. This was the second time he was sent flying. Nothing could be done more than 3 times. This time he used all his strength and his trump card. He would not be defeated by Ji Tianqing again. World slaughter. The East conquering marshal roared. He held 2 long swords with both hands and slashed down at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood still and punched with his left hand. Dragon Elephant Fist. A mountain-sized dragon elephant fist shadow blasted out with terrifying divine might. Boom! With a muffled sound, Marshal Zhendong was sent flying again. Before he landed in the crowd, Ji Tianqing swung the Burial of Heaven sword with his right hand and stabbed out a dazzling cold light. Whoosh! The cold light flashed in the sky. The next moment, the cold light appeared more than 10 miles away and exploded on Marshal Zhendong's chest. Chapter 2678. Boom! There was a muffled explosion. The armor worn by Marshal Zhendong was blown to pieces, turning into thousands of pieces and splashing everywhere. A huge bloody hole was blown out of his chest, and a large chunk of flesh and bones mixed with blood flew out. His internal organs were all minced and blasted by the sword light. Marshal Dong didn't die even though his body was severely injured. He let out a piercing scream. Ah! His body twitched in pain. His murderous intent turned into crimson flames that soared into the sky. Ji Tianqing. Bun Shui, and you are irreconcilable. Marshal Dong roared hysterically. His voice was trembling, hoarse, and filled with grief and anger. Even though he was furious, he didn't lose his mind. He immediately ordered the martial gods next to him. Bun Shui, stop. Attack Ji Tianqing with all your strength. No matter the cost, we must kill him. More than a dozen martial gods were working together to attack the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant in the temple. After receiving Marshal Zhendong's order, they all turned around and charged towards Ji Tianqing without fear of death. In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianqing was surrounded by many golden-armored captains. Not far away, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang were also surrounded by more than a dozen golden-armored captains. Marshal Dong took the opportunity to take out his battleship. He entered the true god-level battleship and started to bombard Ji Tianqing. The two sides fought in the sky, releasing godly light that covered the sky and formed brilliant shadows. It was difficult to determine the winner in a short time. However, The spiritual elder and the divine elephant in the temple were under less pressure. Only 30 or so martial gods were still able to attack them. The remaining 60 or so people were besieging and resisting Ji Tianxing's group, as well as the 4 divine beasts. Someone came to save us? The divine elephant said to the spiritual elder while blocking the attacks of the captains. The old man from the spirit tribe methodically launched a counterattack and replied, "We are citizens of the divine realm and this is the mortal world. Why would anyone come to save us? It was just a battle of interests, a dogfight. But no matter what, this is good news for us." Even though the statue and the spirit clan elder were like arrows at the end of their flight, they were like lamps that had run out of oil. However, they remained calm and collected. They were neither angry nor surprised. The divine elephant tried to attack, trying to break through the encirclement of the many martial gods and escape from the godly palace. Unfortunately, its injuries were too severe, and it was already powerless. He tried 3 times in a row, but all of them ended in failure. He was beaten back by the heaven-seeking martial gods. Originally, this was a good opportunity. Unfortunately, we can no longer escape. The divine elephant transmitted his voice, sounding a little helpless and regretful. The old man from the spirit race said calmly, "His Excellency the Divine King has long since fallen, and the Divine Star has also been destroyed. We should have died in that war with the other god kings a long time ago. To be able to survive until now was already a blessing from the heavens. Since he couldn't escape, he might as well accept his death. However, we are heavenly gods. How can we die for nothing?" The divine elephant and the old man from the spirit race had been together for tens of thousands of years. They had a tacit understanding of each other. It immediately understood what the old man from the spirit race meant. It nodded and said, "If that is the case, then let's drag more people down with us. At least we won't be lonely on the road to hell." The old man from the spirit race nodded and didn't say anything else. He started to wave his hands to cast spells. His body was covered in golden flames, which were as dazzling as a torch. The divine elephant silently endured the attacks of the heaven-seeking martial gods. It also used its last trump card, which gave off dazzling divine light. Whoosh! Destructive ripples of divine power exploded from the bodies of the old man from the spirit race and the divine elephant, shaking the world. Their bodies swelled violently, and a divine might that could destroy the heavens and earth was brewing in their bodies. 100 miles away, Ji Tianxing was fighting fiercely with the east-conquering marshal. Suddenly, he sensed the ripples of divine power in the godly palace. He immediately frowned, and a solemn look flashed past his eyes. Self-destruct? They clearly had a chance to survive, and I was about to save them. Why did they self-destruct? Ji Tianxing knew very well. Even if the old man from the spirit race and the divine elephant were exhausted, the power of their self-destruction wouldn't be too strong. However, they were heavenly gods after all. They had already formed divine Tao laws and created godhoods. The power of their godhoods exploding could destroy everything within a few thousand miles. All living beings below the heavenly god realm could be killed, unless they could get away from the center of the explosion. It was getting better and better. When this thought flashed past his mind, Ji Tianxing retreated without hesitation, ignoring the pursuit of the east-conquering marshal. Whoosh! He moved 50 miles in a flash and rushed into the crowd. He pulled Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang and teleported away. At the same time, he didn't forget to use his divine sense to inform Bai Long, Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Lu Li, and Long Kuan. Bai Long and the 4 divine beasts also stopped fighting and retreated as fast as they could after receiving the news. The heaven-seeking martial gods, who were fighting fiercely with them, were shocked. They didn't understand what was going on. Even the east-conquering marshal was confused. He couldn't help but mutter, "Ji Tianxing, that bastard. He clearly has the upper hand. Why did he suddenly run away?" Indeed, in the battle just now, Ji Tianxing and his 2 sons had killed more than 20 golden-armored captains. Now, there were only a dozen golden-armored captains next to the east-conquering marshal, and they were all badly injured. Even the east-conquering marshal was badly injured. Not only did he have a huge bloody hole in his chest, but his legs were also cut off. The wound on his waist almost cut him in half. Of course, the east-conquering marshal wasn't stupid. He immediately realized that there must be a reason why Ji Tianqing suddenly ran away when he had the upper hand. He immediately turned around and looked inside the divine light shield. His eyes locked onto the divine elephant and the black-robed elder of the spiritual tribe in the ruins of the temple. He saw that the mountain-like divine elephant had expanded by 3 times. Its body was shining with golden light. The black-robed elder's body also expanded. Golden flames were burning all over his body. Their auras were extremely violent and chaotic. They were on the verge of exploding. However, the 30 heaven-seeking martial gods didn't know what was going on. Without the East conquering marshal's order, they didn't dare to stop attacking. They were still attacking the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant. Seeing this, the East conquering marshal's expression changed drastically. His body stiffened. He instantly realized that the spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant were going to self-destruct. It's over. The East conquering marshal's eyes were filled with grief, anger, and despair. Damn Ji Tianqing! You lowly bastard. If you hadn't interfered, that divine beast and the black-robed elder wouldn't have had the chance to self-destruct. Unfortunately, it had come to this. No matter how angry the East conquering marshal was, there was nothing he could do. Retreat! Everyone retreat at once! He roared at the top of his lungs. At the same time, he used his fastest speed to teleport and escape into the distance. However, as soon as he fled 100 miles away, an earth-shattering explosion erupted from the divine palace, reverberating throughout the universe. Chapter 2679. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion reverberated through the entire grotto heaven and blessed land. The spiritual tribe elder and the divine elephant self-destructed at the same time. Their bodies instantly disappeared and turned into boundless golden divine light that spread in all directions. The dazzling golden divine light had the power to destroy the world. In an instant, the temple within a 100-mile radius was flattened to the ground. The palaces, buildings, and high walls were all turned to dust. Only a giant pit was left on the spot, along with countless rocks and dust. The divine light shield, which was already in tatters, also dissipated in an instant. Then, a golden divine light that could destroy heaven and earth engulfed the entire mountain peak like flames. Everything within a few hundred miles was drowned by the divine light. The first to be annihilated were the dozens of gold-armored captains who couldn't escape in time. Even though they were full of divine power, had divine armors, and used shields to block the golden divine light. But it was useless. Under the golden divine light, the dozens of gold-armored captains were crushed on the spot and turned into dust. Then, the golden divine light caught up with Marshal Dong, who was fleeing in panic. Swoosh! The divine light swept past. His body, which was full of wounds and bloody holes, quickly melted like snow under the hot sun. After all, he was only at the 6th level of the true immortal realm and had been severely injured by Ji Tianqing, so he was weak. Also, he was only 100 miles away from the center of the explosion, so he had to withstand a lot of power. In the blink of an eye, he completely disappeared without a trace. Marshal Dong had never thought that he would die on this broken star, after fighting in the universe all his life. Moreover, he had died in such an obscure way, ending his rather glorious life. The next moment, the golden divine light spread for 500 miles, past the mountain peak, and rushed into the sky. Lan Kuan had only escaped 600 miles when it was engulfed by the golden divine light. Swoosh! As the golden divine light swept past, countless cracks appeared on its body, and blood spurted out, revealing its white bones. The incomparably powerful divine power knocked it unconscious, and it fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. Then Qian Yu, the black dragon, and the glazed fire dragon who had escaped 700 miles away were also engulfed by the golden divine light. When the golden divine light reached this place, its power had already weakened somewhat. The 3 divine beasts were severely injured and fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. However, they were still able to maintain their consciousness and did not fall unconscious. White Dragon, who had escaped 800 miles away, was protected by Tianqing's battleship. Even though it was engulfed by the golden divine light, the Tianqing battleship was unscathed, and so was the White Dragon. Only after Ji Tianqing had fled 1,000 miles away with the 2 children did the golden divine light catch up to them. He was already prepared and brought the two children into the sword world. Shua! The golden divine light swept across and struck the Burial of Heaven sword, blasting the Burial of Heaven sword several dozen kilometers away. However, the Burial of Heaven sword was made of a special material and was not damaged. Ji Tianqing and his two sons were also safe and sound. After a short while, the golden divine light spread to a radius of 4,000 miles before its power was greatly reduced, and it gradually dissipated. This apocalyptic disaster finally came to an end. As far as the eye could see, there was scorched earth and ruins within a radius of 4,000 miles. The towering mountain that was 3,000 feet tall had already collapsed, and endless earth and rocks had collapsed. The surrounding mountains and forests were also in ruins. The storm finally stopped. The Spirit Clan Elder and the Divine Elephant had completely disappeared. Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of golden-armored captains under his command were also not spared. They were all smashed to pieces. Only Ji Tianqing and the others survived. Shua! Ji Tianqing flew out of the Burial of Heaven sword with the two children and appeared in the sky. He looked around and saw that the four divine beasts were lying on the ground, covered in blood and in a sorry state. He then flew back. White Dragon also drove the battleship to rescue Lan Kuan. After a while, Ji Tianqing, White Dragon, and the others rescued the four divine beasts. Everyone gathered together and quickly checked the four divine beasts' injuries. White Dragon found the results and said worriedly, "Master, Lan Kuan's injuries are the most serious. He's already unconscious. Qian Yu, Black Dragon, and Azure are also seriously injured, but they can still stay awake." Then he cursed angrily. "That divine elephant and the Spirit Clan Elder really don't know what's good for them. We went to rescue them with good intentions, but they didn't want to live. They actually self-destructed. In the end, they caused us to be in such a miserable state." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said regretfully, "That Spirit Clan Elder and the Divine Elephant probably gave up hope long ago. That's why they self-destructed to end all of this." Although Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Lan Kuan, and Azure were all seriously injured, Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of captains under his command were also killed on the spot. This way it saved us a lot of trouble. Only then did White Dragon's anger dissipate. He nodded and said, "That's right. If it weren't for the Spirit Clan Elder and the Divine Elephant, we would have to pay a heavy price to kill Marshal Zhendong and the hundreds of captains." Ji Tianqing instructed, "Don't worry. When they return to the Divine Pagoda, they will be able to recover after 100 years of seclusion. Take them into the Sword World first and help them heal their injuries. I want to take Chanshin and Yea to kill the other members of the Heaven Punisher." Ji Tianqing never forgot that there were more than 40 captains and more than 10,000 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher in the Blessed Enclave. They were searching everywhere for divine items. The White Dragon also remembered this matter, and did not hesitate to say yes. Then he took the four divine beasts into the Sword World to heal their injuries. Ji Tianqing, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang stayed in the sky above the ruins and waited quietly. Ji Wushuang waited for a while. Feeling puzzled, he couldn't help but ask, "Father, aren't we going to kill the other members of the Heaven Punisher? Why aren't we moving yet?" Before Ji Tianqing could answer, Ji Wuhan explained, "Father wants to wait. Just now, the Spirit Clan Elder and the Divine Elephant self-destructed, destroying everything within a radius of 4,000 miles. That huge explosion spread throughout the entire Blessed Enclave. The huge commotion also alarmed everything within 100,000 miles. Soon, the members of the Heaven Punisher who are searching for treasures outside will rush over to check the situation." Ji Wushuang immediately understood, and nodded to show that he understood. Just as expected. Half an hour later, a pitch-black warship of the Heaven Punisher sped over from afar. Whoosh! When the warship flew over the ruins, Ji Tianqing suddenly swung the Burial of Heaven sword and fiercely slashed at it. With a huge boom, the warship was cut in half. Then Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang attacked at the same time and destroyed the warship that had been cut in half. A golden armor captain and more than 200 soldiers of the Heaven Punisher were also quickly killed by the father and son trio. In just 10 breaths of time, the father and son trio took care of a warship and waited patiently. Soon 2 more warships flew over from afar. When the warships arrived above the ruins, Ji Tianqing swung his sword again and cut the 2 warships in half. Another massacre was about to begin. Chapter 2680. A total of 8 hours passed. Ji Tianqing and his sons had successively destroyed 42 battleships and killed more than 12,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army. The heaven-conquering army that had been scattered all over the cave and busy searching for resources had basically all rushed over. Even the heaven-conquering battleships that were at the edge of the cave would be able to arrive in 8 hours. The three of them waited for an hour, but there were no battleships coming. Ji Wushuang asked tentatively, "Father, we've already destroyed 42 battleships. We should have killed them all, right?" Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and shook his head gently. There should be 5 battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army. I don't know why they haven't come yet. Ji Wuhan said thoughtfully, "Perhaps those people found some precious divine items or secret realms and were delayed. Or perhaps they encountered some danger and couldn't get away for the time being. There's another possibility. They guessed that something had happened here, so they hid in the dark and didn't dare to show themselves." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "These are all possibilities, but we don't have time to continue waiting. Let's split up and search the entire cave." There were only 5 battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army left. The strongest among them was only at the 5th or 6th level of the martial god realm. They were not a threat to Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. Therefore, Ji Tianqing was not worried about the safety of his 2 children. "All right. We will follow father's orders." Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang cupped their fists and bowed. They each held the Source-stone divine sword and turned to leave. One flew to the south and the other flew to the east. The western and northern regions were left to Ji Tianqing alone. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 of them started to move, flying across the sky as fast as lightning. Along the way, the 3 of them used their divine consciousness to search the surroundings, not letting go of any clues. An hour later, Ji Tianqing had searched an area of 40,000 miles and discovered something in the mountain range in the northwest. 3 heaven-conquering battleships and more than 500 heaven-conquering army in black armor had formed a huge encirclement in the sky. 19 martial gods of foreign tribes with different appearances and strange attire were trapped in the encirclement. The 2 sides were fighting fiercely in the mountain range. The sky darkened and the sun and moon dimmed. Dazzling divine light constantly bloomed and shone in the sky. A deafening sound reverberated between heaven and earth. Violent and devastating shockwaves crazily crashed into the surrounding mountains and peaks. Many mountains and forests had been destroyed by the aftermath of the battle, turning into desolate ruins. Ji Tianqing observed for a moment and saw the situation clearly. Even though the 19 foreign race martial gods were not weak and had mastered all kinds of divine powers and secret techniques, they were not weak at all. However, there were too few of them, and they could not join forces to attack, nor did they have any warships to use. On the other hand, the 3 captains in golden armor and the more than 500 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army cooperated very well, advancing and retreating in an orderly fashion. The 3 heaven-slicing battleships also floated in the sky and constantly shot out destructive light beams, which put tremendous pressure on the martial gods of the alien tribes. The 19 martial gods of the foreign tribes were seriously injured. If the stalemate continued, their divine power would soon be exhausted. At that time, they would be in a passive position and be killed one by the heaven punishers. On the other hand, Ji Tianqing recognized the 19 martial gods. They were the adventurer teams that had followed him into the grotto heaven. Ji Tianqing scanned the area with his divine consciousness and discovered that there were several corpses of martial gods of the alien tribes in the ruined mountain range. At the same time, there were the wreckage of 2 heaven-slicing battleships and the corpses of many heaven-conquering army soldiers. It seems that the 20 or so martial gods of the 4 teams worked together. However, they encountered the heaven-conquering army and were surrounded by 5 heaven-slicing battleships. They could not escape. The 2 sides have been fighting for several hours, and 7 martial gods of the alien tribes have already died. 2 heaven-slicing battleships have also been destroyed. More than 400 heaven-conquering army soldiers have also been killed by the martial gods of the alien tribes. Ji Tianqing murmured to himself. Then he took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. "China, you don't have to search anymore. I have already found 5 heaven-slicing battleships and thousands of heaven-conquering army soldiers." After entering the message, He waved his hand and sent out 2 jade slips. Then, he took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and prepared to destroy the 3 heaven-slicing battleships and kill the heaven-conquering army soldiers. However, after a short 10 breaths, a communication jade slip flew over from afar. Whoosh! With a flash of black light, the jade slip flew over to Ji Tianqing and stopped in front of him. He picked up the jade slip and looked at it. It was a message from Ji Wushuang. His divine consciousness entered the jade slip, and Ji Wushuang's voice sounded in his mind. Father, I encountered 6 martial gods of the alien tribes and 5 interstellar pirates near a small town in the east. They have teamed up to kill me and steal my treasures. However, Father, don't worry. I am dealing with them. They can't do anything to me. Ji Tianqing's eyes narrowed when he saw this message. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Those martial gods of the alien tribes have teamed up with the interstellar pirates? Those damned bastards. If they dare to hurt Yaya, I will make sure they die without a burial place. It was reasonable for the martial gods of the alien tribes and the interstellar pirates to work together and steal treasures from the grotto heaven. Ji Tianqing was not surprised. After all, they were stronger when they worked together and had a chance to steal more divine items. But of all things, they should not have made a move against Ji Wushuang. Yunyao Ji Ku and the 2 children were Ji Tianqing's reverse scale. Anyone who dared to touch them would die without a complete corpse and be reduced to ashes. Ji Tianqing ignored the heaven-conquering army soldiers and the 19 martial gods of the alien tribes. He turned around and flew away without hesitation. He teleported continuously in the sky and rushed to the east as fast as he could. In just 15 minutes he had traveled more than 40,000 miles. When he flew over a majestic mountain range and was about to reach the vast grassland, he saw a dazzling divine light in the sky ahead. Dazzling multicolored divine spell radiance was accompanied by a series of loud noises. Ji Tianqing quickly sped up and gripped the Burial of Heaven sword tightly in his right hand. In a moment, he flew over the grassland and arrived near the battlefield. His divine sense penetrated the divine light in the sky and saw the situation clearly. He saw Ji Wushuang, who was wearing an icy blue dress, waving the Source Stone divine sword and fending off the attacks of the 7 martial gods. She was covered in an icy blue divine light, and was covered by a divine light shield. Other than her messy hair and sweaty forehead, there were no obvious wounds on her body. On the other hand, the 7 martial gods of the alien tribes and the interstellar pirates were mostly injured. Their clothes were ragged and they were covered in blood. Ji Tianqing knew that Ji Wushuang had been fighting with the martial gods for a long time, while he was rushing over to rescue her. The 2 sides fought for thousands of miles and 4 martial gods had been killed by Ji Wushuang. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing heaved a sigh of relief and rushed over with his sword. Chapter 2681. Whoosh! 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 The Burial of Heaven swung his sword, and dozens of dazzling golden sword lights bloomed in the sky. The 7 strangely dressed martial gods did not even have time to dodge before they were enveloped by the sword lights. Bang! 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 A series of muffled explosions rang out. Blood splattered in the golden light as cries of agony rang out. Only a one-eyed pirate managed to dodge the fatal sword lights. The remaining 6 martial gods were struck by the sword lights. Their limbs were severed on the spot, and their bodies were even split in half. For martial gods were killed instantly. Their body parts fell from the sky and landed on the grassland with a plop. 2 martial gods were severely injured. Their bodies were covered in blood as they retreated in panic. The battle between the 2 sides temporarily stopped. Ji Wushuang turned her head and looked behind her. When she saw that it was Ji Tianqing, she was instantly pleasantly surprised. Father, why are you here? Ji Tianqing flew to her side and sized her up. When he saw that she was indeed uninjured, he said, "How can I not worry when you're in such a dangerous situation?" A joyful smile appeared on Ji Wushuang's small face. She nodded and said, "I knew that you would definitely come to save me." At this moment, the 2 surviving martial gods of the foreign tribes met up with the one-eyed pirate. The 3 of them looked sharply at Ji Tianqing. When they saw his face, their expressions changed drastically. Damn it! It's him! That earth-shattering explosion! How can he still be alive? Damn it! How did he get here so quickly? It was obvious that the martial gods of the foreign tribes and the interstellar pirates knew that an earth-shattering explosion had occurred in the grotto heaven. They could guess that the explosion had something to do with Ji Tianqing and the Heaven Punishers. They had thought that Ji Tianqing had been killed by the East-conquering marshal and the Heaven Punishers and had died tragically in the explosion. That was why they had dared to surround and kill Ji Wushuang when they encountered him. However, they had never thought that Ji Tianqing would still be alive and would rush over as quickly as he could. The two martial gods and the interstellar space pirate immediately wore twisted expressions. Their eyes were filled with despair. They had seen Ji Tianqing's divine might and knew that Ji Tianqing was a terrifying true god powerhouse. Now that they had fallen into Ji Tianqing's hands, they had no way out. Ji Tianqing looked at the three of them indifferently and said coldly, "Don't wait for me to make a move. Kill yourselves." The three of them stiffened and revealed looks of shame and indignation. They were both humiliated and unwilling. The two martial gods clenched their teeth and shouted coldly in unison, "Sir, we admit that you are powerful, but you want us to kill ourselves? You are too conceited." Obviously, the two of them refused to give up hope and were still hoping to escape. But that one-eyed pirate was very shrewd. He rolled his eyes and came up with an idea. He hurriedly took a few steps forward, and with a face full of fear and trepidation, he knelt down and kowtowed to Ji Tianqing, saying in a sincere tone, "Senior, I know I was wrong. How would I dare to be enemies with your daughter? It's all because of these two bastards. They forced me to join forces with them to attack your daughter and take the treasure. Senior, please judge clearly. I am sincerely repentant and am willing to serve you faithfully. I will be at your beck and call, and will be absolutely loyal to you. I only ask that you show mercy and spare my lowly life." The ferocious-looking one-eyed pirate had no dignity or backbone at all. He had knelt down and surrendered directly. Moreover, he had even blamed the two martial gods of the foreign tribes. The two martial gods were dumbfounded. They glared at the one-eyed pirate and scolded him. "One-eyed pirate, you are slandering us. You are the culprit and you dare to push the blame to us? It was your pirate crew that tried to rope us in and join forces with us. It was also your idea to attack this little girl." The two martial gods pointed at the one-eyed pirate and trembled in anger. They were about to vomit blood. The one-eyed pirate ignored them. He tried his best to put on a pious and respectful appearance and kowtowed to Ji Tianqing. "Senior, they would rather die than surrender and admit their mistakes. They are the ones who deserve to die. I respect and worship you and am willing to serve you for the rest of my life." The two martial gods were so angry that their faces turned green. They could not suppress their injuries and spat out mouthfuls of blood. "Bastard! How can you be so shameless? One-eyed pirate, you are a space pirate. You are a slug with no dignity or backbone." The one-eyed pirate turned a deaf ear to the two's curses. He only looked at Ji Tianqing with a smile. He knew very well that this was the only choice he could make under the current circumstances. If he did not kneel down and surrender and still dared to fight Ji Tianqing, only death would await him. He had to endure the humiliation and save his life first. When Ji Tianqing lowered his guard, he would try to contact the chief or captain. The Falling Star pirate group he belonged to was the strongest pirate group in the Green Sun Galaxy. There were two true god experts among them. As long as the captain brought a large group of people here, they would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianqing and the others. At that time, not only would he regain his freedom, but he would also make a great contribution and be put in an important position by the captain. However, the one-eyed pirate's fantasy was immediately interrupted. "Stop arguing, all of you, shut up." Ji Tianqing waved his hand coldly and shouted. He looked at the one-eyed pirate with a sharp gaze and asked expressionlessly, "You want to be loyal to me? Be my slave?" The one-eyed pirate saw hope and was pleasantly surprised. He nodded without hesitation and said, "Yes." Ji Wushuang frowned and whispered to Ji Tianqing, "Father, you want to take him as a servant? Isn't this guy too ugly?" Ji Tianqing did not answer her. He looked at the one-eyed pirate coldly and said in a mocking tone, "Haha. You think too highly of yourself. You want to be my slave? You don't have that right." As he spoke, he slowly raised his left hand. "All three of you must die." As soon as he finished speaking, He waved his left hand and shot out 3 dazzling sword lights. Swish! 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 The sword lights instantly cut through the sky and attacked the one-eyed pirate and the 2 foreign race martial gods. The sword lights locked onto their souls and they had nowhere to hide. They all widened their eyes in fear. The dazzling golden sword lights rapidly enlarged in their eyes. In the next moment, bam! 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 3 muffled sounds exploded at almost the same time. The one-eyed pirate and the 2 foreign race martial gods were instantly blasted into pieces by the sword lights. Not even their bones were left. Whether they knelt and surrendered or would rather die than submit, they could not escape the fate of death. In front of Ji Tianqing, they did not have the right to play any tricks. Let's go. After the sword lights dispersed, Ji Tianqing turned and flew away with Ji Wushuang, rushing towards the northwest. The 2 of them had only flown for tens of thousands of miles when Ji Tianqing received another message from Ji Wuhan. Father, I was attacked by 12 foreign race martial gods near a lake in the south. However, Father, please do not worry. I have been fighting with them for a long time and have already killed 7 of them. I am chasing the remaining 5. Chapter 2682. After receiving Ji Wuhan's message, Ji Tianqing knew that he was also in danger. However, Ji Wuhan was strong, calm and wise. He had already averted the danger. No wonder Chanshan took so long to reply to me, Ji Tianqing muttered and put away the communication jade slip. Ji Wushuang asked with concern, Father, Big Brother is also being attacked? Should we go and save him? Ji Tianqing shook his head and said, no need. Let's go to the northwest. There's still a large group of damned people there. Father, aren't you afraid that Big Brother will have other thoughts if you're so biased? Ji Wushuang blinked her large eyes and muttered softly. Ji Tianqing was amused by her. He extended a finger and tapped her forehead. He said with a smile, what bias? Your big brother is young, but he's calm and wise. He can already hold his own. He killed more than half of the foreign race martial gods that surrounded him. 5 of them escaped. He's chasing after them. He'll meet up with us soon. Ji Wushuang touched her fair and smooth forehead and said with an embarrassed smile, Big Brother is still the best. Ji Tianqing did not say anything else. The father and daughter hurried and returned to the mountain range in the northwest half an hour later. The situation was just as Ji Tianqing had expected. The 3 warships and hundreds of heaven-conquering soldiers were still attacking more than a dozen foreign race martial gods. The battle was not over yet. However, the battlefield had shifted 8,000 miles to the north. The number of people on both sides had also decreased. There were originally 19 foreign race martial gods, but now there were only 16 left. Moreover, their injuries were even more severe. The 3 heaven-conquering warships and the 3 gold-armored captains were safe and sound, but the number of heaven-conquering soldiers had decreased by more than 80. Ji Tianqing and his daughter stood in the sky and observed for a moment from nearly 100 miles away. Ji Wushuang could not help but ask, Father, should we kill the heaven-conquering soldiers first or the foreign race martial gods first? Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, kill them all. So domineering. Ji Tianqing waved her little fists and looked at Ji Tianqing with starry eyes. Ji Tianqing did not say much. He directly raised his palms and released a golden divine light that covered the sky and earth, pouring it onto the battlefield. Swoosh! Swish! In the blink of an eye, the dozens of dazzling golden lights scattered around the battlefield, forming a protective shield that covered an area of 100 miles, sealing off the battlefield. Ji Wushuang revealed a trace of understanding and asked, Father, are you going to catch them all in one fell swoop, leaving no fowls or dogs behind? Yes. Ji Tianqing nodded and explained, if Father were to attack directly, there would be a lot of casualties. Wouldn't those people be scared away? At that time we'll have to waste time chasing after them. That makes sense. Ji Wushuang nodded in agreement. At the same time, the martial gods of the heaven punishers and foreign races inside the sealing formation stopped attacking at the same time. Everyone looked up at the sky and cautiously looked at the golden light seal, searching around for the person who had set up the seal. Under everyone's gazes, Ji Tianqing and Ji Wushuang appeared grandly. Swoosh! He and Ji Wushuang flew to the golden light shield and stood still, looking down at the martial gods of the heaven punishers and foreign races. The three golden-armored captains and many heaven punishers did not recognize Ji Tianqing. They roared angrily and swung their weapons at the golden light shield. When the 16 martial gods of the foreign races saw Ji Tianqing's face, their expressions changed drastically. Some were filled with astonishment, some were bewildered, and there were even some who revealed expressions of joy and anticipation. However, there were also some who had grave expressions and their eyes were filled with worry. It's him? How is he still alive? That's impossible. The explosion just now could have destroyed the world. It must have something to do with him. The East conquering marshal and many heaven punishers are dead. How can he still be alive? Just how powerful is this person? This person has a blood feud with the heaven punishers. If he kills these heaven punishers, we'll be saved. I'm afraid it's not that simple. He's not related to us. Why would he save us? Why did he set up the seal and seal all of us? Could it be that he wants to kill all of us? More than a dozen martial gods of the foreign races discussed with complicated expressions. They were not in a hurry to attack the golden light shield. Instead, they took the opportunity to retreat. The three heaven punishing battleships and hundreds of heaven punishers attacked the golden light shield with all their might. Boom! Purple light danced in the sky. However, the golden light shield was extremely sturdy. There was not even a crack on it. Ji Tianqing raised his palms expressionlessly and started to control the seal. Swoosh! Under his control, the golden shield shrunk at an extremely fast speed. After a short while, the light shield shrunk from 100 miles to 3,000 feet. More than 400 heaven punishers, 3 gold-armored fleet captains, 3 heaven-punishing battleships, and 16 martial gods of the foreign races were all crowded together. The 3 heaven punishers were as huge as mountains. Now that the light shield had shrunk to such a size, the heaven punishers had no space to move. They could only shrink as well. The 3 fleet captains started to panic. They quickly ordered all the heaven punishers to enter the heaven punishers. At that moment, Ji Tianqing waved his hands and used a secret technique. He shouted softly, "Explode!" As his voice rang out, the golden light ball with a diameter of 3,000 feet suddenly exploded. Boom! Along with an earth-shattering explosion, the golden ball of light exploded with a bang, and golden divine flames that blotted out the sky and covered the earth soared. The 3 heaven-punishing battleships were blown into thousands of pieces and scattered among the ruins. Hundreds of heaven punishers were also blown to pieces and scattered among the mountains. The 16 martial gods of the foreign races and the 3 fleet captains could not escape death. They were blown to pieces and mixed with the dirt and dust. They were buried hundreds of miles away. After a long time, the deafening explosion finally stopped. The golden light in the sky dissipated. The heaven punishers and martial gods of the foreign races no longer existed. Ji Wushuang withdrew her amazed gaze and looked at Ji Tianqing sideways. She said, "Father, I also want to learn this method of killing without spilling blood." She was lively and kind by nature. She was never belligerent and did not like bloody battles. However, this was fate. In order to survive, she had to learn how to fight and kill. However, she still hated the kind of fighting where swords clashed and blood splattered. She could more easily accept the method of controlling supreme divine power and directly destroying the enemy like just now. Ji Tianqing understood his daughter's thoughts. He nodded slightly and said, "This is a true God-level divine power. When you break through to the true God realm, I will teach you." Okay. Ji Wushuang quickly nodded, full of anticipation. Then the father and daughter turned around and left to continue searching in the cave. Not long after, Ji Wuhan also dealt with the enemy and sent a message to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing asked him to continue searching and collect some precious divine items and resources. Ji Wuhan naturally did as he was told. Chapter 2683. 2 days later, Ji Tianqing and his 2 sons left the Blessed Enclave together. There were countless divine items and cultivation resources in the Blessed Enclave. However, they only looted a portion of the precious and rare treasures and resources. They were not interested in those divine items and resources that were made of ordinary materials. The treasures and resources that the 3 of them looted were mainly metal ores and medicinal herbs. The medicinal herbs would be used to refine divine elixirs. The metal ores would be put into the sword world to help the Earth Spirit race increase their strength and improve their smelting methods. The three of them left the blessed enclave and returned to the surface of the divine planet. Ji Tianqing piloted the battleship and started searching the divine planet with Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. Marshal Zhendong and the 200 captains he had brought with him had died in the blessed enclave. However, there were still more than 60 captains and 6,000 soldiers on the divine planet. They were still searching for resources and hunting down the alien martial gods and space pirates. If they did not kill this group of heaven punishers, it would be a disaster in the future. After all, this group of heaven punishers was large and powerful. No matter which world they invaded, they would be invincible. For the next 2 months, Ji Tianqing had been searching for traces of heaven punishers on the divine planet. At the same time, he looted some precious treasures and resources. During this time, he found more than 50 heaven-punishing battleships. Not only did he destroy those battleships and kill all their captains, but he also killed more than 4,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers. As a result, there was basically no sign of heaven punishers on the surface of the divine planet. However, the number of battleships did not match. There were more than a dozen battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers who were missing. Ji Tianqing searched for half a month but did not find anything. He only found some scattered battleships and corpses. He guessed that the battleships and more than 1,000 soldiers of the heaven punishers had either fled the divine planet or been killed by the alien martial gods and space pirates. Since that was the case, he did not waste any more time and left the divine planet. A few days later, Tianqing's battleship left the scattered star seas and returned to the Five Elements world. Bai Long, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang returned to the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower to cultivate in seclusion. The 4 divine beasts had also entered the divine pagoda and were recuperating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianqing checked the treasures and resources he had plundered from the divine planet. Then, he controlled the Five Elements world and continued to roam the Azure Sun galaxy. Half a month later, the world of 5 elements crossed the dark void and disappeared into the boundless darkness. The shining god star was still floating in the void, slowly aging and weakening. There were still a lot of treasures and resources left on the divine planet, which benefited the martial gods and space pirates of the Green Sun galaxy. If nothing unexpected happened, a large group of martial gods would soon rush to the divine planet to plunder resources. When all the divine treasures and resources on the divine planet were taken away, the divine planet would deteriorate and age faster. Perhaps after a few thousand years, or even tens of thousands of years, half of the divine star would turn into dust and disappear forever. In the blink of an eye, another 2 years had passed. During this time, the 5 Elements world had flown more than 20 billion miles in the void. Ji Tianqing had saved 9 more worlds and killed nearly 300 martial gods, and more than 30,000 soldiers. He had also encountered 2 planets that were rich in resources but lifeless. He had used the power of the worlds to devour them. After refining the 2 stars, his strength had reached the peak of perfection, and had increased by 2 times. However, he was still at the peak of the true God realm and could not break through to the heavenly God realm. 2 years had passed in the outside world. The 4 divine beasts had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 100 years. Their injuries had all healed. Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang's strength had also broken through to the true God realm. Ji Tianqing did not forget his previous promise to teach Ji Wushuang the star explosion divine technique. Yun Yao and Ji Ku had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. The 5 Elements world had been roaming in the void for more than 10 years. But the 2 of them had been cultivating for 700 years. Their strength had finally caught up to Ji Tianqing and reached the 9th level of the true God realm. Even if they continued to cultivate in seclusion, they would not be able to increase their strength. They could only strengthen their foundation of the divine Tao and make their divine power more powerful and vast. Therefore, the 2 of them ended their seclusion and accompanied Ji Tianqing to kill the heaven punishers and save the various worlds. 3 years later, the 5 Elements world had reached the center of the Azure Sun galaxy and was close to the Azure Sun planet. At the same time, the news of the death of Marshal Dong and more than 200 captains had already spread throughout the Azure Sun galaxy. Almost all the heaven punishers in the great worlds knew about this. The martial gods and generals of the heaven-slaying sect were filled with anxiety and worry. Fortunately, the East Expedition Fleet still had a deputy marshal guarding the Azure Sun planet. This person's name was Shenyang, and his strength was second only to Marshal Dong. He had reached the 5th level of the True God realm. Normally, the East conquering marshal had a lot of authority, and he controlled the affairs of the entire fleet. Although Shenyang was the deputy marshal in name, he did not have much real power. He was only equivalent to Marshal Dong's assistant and advisor. Ever since Marshal Dong had died, Deputy Marshal Shenyang was not sad. Instead, he was secretly glad. He could finally take the position and control the entire fleet. From today onwards, he would take the position and change his name to Marshal Ruyang. The 3,000 battleships of the East Expedition Fleet, more than 300,000 Heaven Punishers, and more than 400,000 puppet soldiers were all under his control. In just half a month, Admiral Zhuoyang had pacified the morale of the soldiers under his command and taken over the military affairs of the fleet, taking full control of it. The generals and captains guarding the various worlds were all anxious and worried. They all sent messages to Marshal Ruyang to ask for countermeasures. Marshal Ruyang did not hesitate to give orders to deploy the troops. Those planets that did not have enough resources or had not been conquered were temporarily abandoned. The remaining 200 battleships took more than 20,000 Heaven Punishers and returned to the Azure Sun planet. As a result, there were as many as 360 battleships guarding the Azure Sun planet, and more than 60,000 Heaven Punishers. Marshal Ruyang led many captains to strengthen the Azure Sun planet's divine light shield, and added many defense divine arrays to the Heaven Punishing Temple. In just 2 years, the defense of the Azure Sun planet had increased by 3 times. Everyone knew that Marshal Ruyang wanted to defend the Azure Sun planet against Ji Tianqing's sudden attack. After all, Ji Tianqing had come aggressively and his methods were ruthless. He could even kill the Eastern Marshal. How strong was he? Marshal Ruyang guessed that Ji Tianqing would come to the Azure Sun planet. However, there was no way he would run away without a fight. If he did, he would be severely punished by the Heaven Punishers and become the laughingstock of the Heaven Punishers. In the past 2 years, Marshal Ruyang had not only strengthened the defense of the Azure Sun planet and the Heaven Punishing Temple, but he had also deployed the corresponding countermeasures and plans. He had built the Black Sun into an impregnable fortress. The 360 martial gods and 60,000 elite warriors were also united and had high morale. Now Marshal Ruyang had prepared everything. He was sitting in the Heaven Punishing Temple, waiting for Ji Tianqing to come and die. Chapter 2684. The void was dark, cold, and dead silent. The dazzling golden 5 elements world silently approached the Black Sun, its speed gradually slowing down. Looking at it from billions of miles away, the huge Black Sun hung quietly in the void. The size of this planet was only 30% smaller than the 5 elements world. Among the many stars in the Azure Sun galaxy, this was already the largest star in terms of size. The entire surface of the planet was protected by a thick green light, like a dark green sun. This was how the Black Sun got its name. Around the Black Sun, in the void hundreds of millions of miles away, there were more than a dozen planets of different sizes. Those stars, big or small, were all barren stars without life. They were like loyal guards guarding the Black Sun firmly. Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and Jiku stood on the golden light barrier of the 5 elements world and looked at the Black Sun from afar. The Black Sun's position and the surrounding planets are much better than the Purple Cloud planet. If there's a heavenly god-level powerhouse, he can set up powerful divine formations and astral divine cannons on the surrounding 16 planets and turn them into satellites of the Black Sun. Once there's an invasion, the 16 satellites will be able to detect the enemy's movements in advance and launch attacks and interceptions. Yunyao and Jiku both understood that the so-called satellites referred to the guardian planets. Yunyao nodded slightly in agreement. Jiku shook his head with a smile and said, "If it's a god from the upper realm, he'll naturally do that. However, this is the mortal world. Under the heavenly axiom, no one can break through to the heavenly god level, so no one can use that kind of divine power. Moreover, even if there's an invasion, there'll only be martial gods and true gods. The Black Sun's divine light barrier alone is enough to stop most true gods." Indeed, whether it was the Black Sun or the Purple Cloud planet, The divine light barrier formed by the heavenly axiom was a heavenly God-level defense. 99% of true gods could not break through the divine light barrier. Only peerless powerhouses like Ji Tianqing and the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher, who had special opportunities and techniques, could break through the divine light barrier and invade the various planets. Jike's words made Ji Tianqing feel a little emotional. If it weren't for the Heaven Punisher race causing chaos in the 3,000 worlds, we would have ascended to the divine world and become heavenly gods. Only after reaching the heavenly god realm and condensing a godhead could one be considered a true god. At that time, I'll be able to use all kinds of divine abilities. Yunyao nodded again and said in a low voice, yes, we can ascend and leave. The grudges of this mortal world have nothing to do with us. However, the heaven-destroying race had their eyes on the five elements world. They were determined to invade and even destroy it. Our parents, relatives, and friends will also be enslaved by the heaven crushers, or even slaughtered. Moreover, the heaven punishers had powerful gods supporting them, so they could avoid the laws of heaven and avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. All signs indicated that the heaven punisher race and the god spirit behind them were plotting something. No matter what, we have to destroy the heaven punisher race before we can ascend with peace of mind. Seeing the gloomy atmosphere, Jike comforted them. Big brother Tianqing, eldest senior sister, you don't have to worry too much. With our current strength, we are invincible in the galaxy. As long as we sweep through the 3 major star zones and reach the Heaven Punisher planet, it will be the end of the Heaven Punisher race. At most, in a few decades, we will be able to destroy the Heaven Punisher race and successfully ascend to the divine world. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, that's right. That's my plan. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's deal with the Black Sun first. Although we have plundered a large amount of treasures and resources from the divine world and killed Marshal Dong and many other Heaven Punisher martial gods, there is still Marshal Dong. The East Conquering Fleet still has a vice-marshal called Xian Yang, who is overseeing the Black Sun. After Marshal Dong is killed, Xian Yang will definitely take over the marshal's position and control the situation. We have to kill him and save the Black Sun. Only then can we intimidate the East Conquering Fleet. Yunyao thought for a moment and said, the 3 of us will go to the Black Sun. There's no need to bring the others. The 4 divine beasts have just recovered from their injuries. They still need to cultivate in seclusion for a while. Wuhan and Wushuang have just broken through to the true immortal realm. They still need to cultivate and stabilize their divine Tao foundation. Bai Long needs to stay in the 5 elements world to prevent any accidents. Ji Tianqing and Ji Ke both agreed with her arrangement. One day later, the 5 elements world slowed down to the lowest speed and stopped in the void 100 million miles away from the Black Sun. Ji Tianqing took out the Tianqing battleship and flew toward the Black Sun with Yunyao and Ji Ke. 100 million miles was considered very close to the 2 massive stars. However, it was an extremely long journey for ordinary immortals. Even though the Tianqing battleship's flying speed was comparable to that of a heavenly god realm elite, Ji Tianqing and the other 2 used 10 days to reach the Black Sun. When the Tianqing battleship landed on the blue light barrier, Ji Tianqing immediately felt that something was wrong. How can the divine light barrier of the Black Sun be so thick? Its power is twice as strong as the barrier of the purple cloud planet. Could it be that the heavenly Tao is taking special care of the Black Sun? No, it must be that the heaven punishers on the Black Sun have strengthened the divine light barrier. Yunyao and Ji Ke also noticed this. After careful observation, they came to a conclusion. That's right. The divine light barrier of the Black Sun has been strengthened by someone. I've already sensed that there are many divine arrays inside the divine light barrier and the aura of the heaven punishers. Yunyao was very sensitive to the aura of power. Marshal Ruyang and the heaven punishers' deployment could not escape her detection. Ji Ke looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, Brother Tianqing, is there a way to enter the Black Sun? Will it be very troublesome? Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. He took out the sword of burial of heaven and said, no matter how strong it is, it's still a heavenly god-level barrier. With the origin stone divine sword in hand, there's no pressure at all. Then he used the divine eye secret technique and carefully observed the azure barrier. Half a day later, he found an area where the power was slightly weaker and started to break the barrier. With the help of the sword of burial of heaven, He only used one day to break a hole in the azure barrier. A hole that was 3 meters in diameter and 10 feet deep appeared in front of the three of them. Whoosh! 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 Ji Tianqing and the others passed through the passage-like hole and entered the Black Sun. At the same time, on the Black Sun, high above the boundless sky ocean, in the Golden Heaven Punisher Divine Palace, a large array that monitored the divine light barrier suddenly flashed with purple light and issued a warning. A moment later, the Heaven Punisher Martial God, who was guarding the divine array, noticed something unusual and quickly reported it to Marshal Ruyang. Marshal Ruyang, who had been recuperating for a long time, was instantly filled with fighting spirit and gave the order to gather. When the news spread, the entire Heaven Punisher Divine Palace was awakened. Many Heaven Punisher martial gods and guards gathered on the plaza and waited for Marshal Ruyang's orders. A well-planned hunting operation that had been premeditated for a long time was thus kicked off. Chapter 2685. The Black Sun was a foreign world that Ji Tianqing had never been to before. After entering the Black Sun, the three of them did not act rashly. They knew that Marshal Ruyang was prepared and had even strengthened the defenses. Why would they attack rashly? Ji Tianqing brought Yunyao and Jiku to a continent. After some small tricks, the three of them disguised themselves and sneaked into a bustling main city. More than 2 million martial artists and civilians lived in the city with a radius of 300 miles. A heaven-conquering martial god and more than 30 heaven-conquering warriors were guarding the prosperous city. The martial artists and civilians in the city had become slaves of the martial gods. In recent decades, the slaves had been oppressed by the martial gods. Not only were all their cultivation resources and belongings confiscated, but they also had to work hard every day and night to collect cultivation resources. Ji Tianqing, Yunyao remained invisible and easily snuck into the city governor's mansion. They captured the martial god guarding the mansion. The martial god was a captain and only had the strength of a 4th-level martial god. Ji Tianqing captured him easily and did not give him a chance to escape or send a message. He did not even make a sound. However, Ji Tianqing performed the soul-searching secret technique and took away the martial god's memory. As a result, not only did he learn about the situation on the Black Sun, but he also learned about Marshal Ruyang's plan. The Black Sun has 4 continents and 18 divine kingdoms, which are controlled by 9 generals and 72 martial gods of the heavens. We're in Windwell City on the Waning Moon continent. The Heaven Palace built by Marshal Zhendong is in the sky ocean between the Waning Moon continent and the Wind Frost continent. This poor guy has low strength and status. He's only been to the Heaven Palace once. As he spoke, Ji Tianqing casually shot out a ball of golden flames and burned the unconscious heaven-defying martial god to ashes. Yunyao frowned and asked Tianqing, how many martial gods and martial gods are there on the Black Sun? Should we attack the heaven-punishing divine palace directly, or should we assassinate the martial gods one by one? Ji Tianqing fused with the memories of the Lord of Windwell City and replied without hesitation. After Marshal Ruyang took control of the power, he guessed that I would come to deal with him. Therefore, he withdrew a large number of martial gods and warriors and strengthened the defenses of the Black Sun and the heaven-punishing divine palace. Currently, there were 360 martial gods and 60,000 heaven crusaders on the Black Sun. Among them, there were 60 martial gods and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition guarding the 4 continents. The remaining 300 martial gods and 40,000 heaven-punishing warriors are all waiting for orders in the heaven-punishing divine palace. Jiku also frowned. He said gravely, in that case, Marshal Ruyang wants to defend the heaven-punishing divine hall and fight us there? Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and shook his head. That's not necessarily true. Marshal Ruyang has already made sufficient preparations. It won't be that simple. It's just that only he knows what his plan is. After pausing for a moment, he added another sentence. A year ago, Marshal Ruyang led over 100 martial gods and set up a large number of divine arrays on the azure light barrier. Among them, there were many divine arrays that monitored the movements of the azure light barrier. Once the azure light barrier was destroyed and an expert invaded, the divine arrays in the heaven-punishing divine palace would sound the alarm. The Lord of Windwell City happened to be involved in setting up the divine arrays, so he knew about this. Yunyao frowned and said in a low voice, "In that case, Marshal Ruyang must know that we are here. If he is vigilant enough, he can even use some divine arrays to monitor our location." Ji Tianqing nodded. "Maybe. Marshal Ruyang is not as strong as Marshal Zhendong, but he is very cautious." Ji Ke raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "It seems that this will be a head-on battle. What's there to be afraid of?" Ji Tianqing did not think much of it and was full of confidence. Yunyao asked, "Now we already know the layout of the Black Sun planet and the approximate location of the heaven-punishing divine palace. Should we continue to operate in the waning moon continent or go directly to the heaven-punishing divine palace?" "Of course we should go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers," Ji Tianqing said with a serious face. "If the three of us can't even take care of these small fries, how can we go to the heaven-punishing divine palace and wipe out the heaven punishers?" He had already made his decision. Yunyao and Ji Ke naturally agreed and would not stop him. Then, the three of them left Windwell City quietly and flew toward the east. The Wind Frost continent was to the east of the Waning Moon continent. Between the two continents was the boundless Sky Sea. In order to reach the Sky Sea as soon as possible, Ji Tianqing steered the battleship and sped through the sky. In just 3 days, the battleship left the Waning Moon continent and entered the Sky Sea. Not only were there billions of fish and prawns in the boundless Sky Sea, but there were also many powerful sea beasts. When the battleship flew over the Sky Sea, Ji Tianqing and the other two saw many sea beasts that were as big as mountains. They cut through the waves and fought with their lives in the Sky Sea. Of course, to the three of them who were peak true gods, this was a small scene. If there were any ignorant sea beasts that dared to attack them, they would definitely be blasted into pieces. Before they knew it, another day had passed. At that moment, the sun was shining brightly and the Sky Sea was turbulent. All of a sudden, 3 heaven-slicing battleships flew over from the front. They were arranged in a triangular formation as they sped toward them. Ji Tianqing noticed them, but he did not intend to avoid them. Instead, he sped up and charged toward them. Swoosh! Tianqing's battleship turned into a ray of black light and shot across the sky at lightning speed, crashing into the battleship in the middle. The 3 battleships noticed Tianqing's battleship and paused for a while. Then they opened the main cannons at the front of the battleship and shot out blinding purple light beams. Boom! 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 3 giant purple light beams with great power blasted toward Tianqing's battleship. When the purple light beams approached, Tianqing's battleship suddenly flipped a few times and suddenly descended 300 feet, dodging the attack of the light beams. In the next moment, Tianqing's battleship crashed into the heaven-punishing battleship in the middle. Boom! Crack! In the deafening sound, the heaven-punishing battleship that was 1,000 feet long was smashed into pieces. More than half of the heaven-punishing warriors in the battleship were killed or injured. They fell into the Sky Sea like dumplings. The leader of the golden armored battleship was also injured. He fell into the sky and quickly turned around to run away. Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, Yunyao and Ji Ke flew out of the battleship and attacked with their divine swords and spears. Swoosh! 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 Sword radiance flashed and spears covered the sky. In just 3 breaths, Yunyao and Ji Ke killed all the heaven-punishing warriors who were lucky enough to survive. The injured golden armored battleship was also stabbed by Ji Ke's spear, and his body exploded. The other 2 heaven-punishing battleships were scared out of their wits when they saw this scene. They turned around and ran away in a hurry. Yunyao and Ji Ke returned to Tianqing's battleship. Ji Tianqing quickly piloted the battleship and started to chase after them. The 2 parties sped over the sea like 3 rays of black light shooting across the sky. The distance between the 2 of them was constantly shrinking. Chapter 2686. In order to escape, the 2 heaven-conquering battleships pushed their power to the maximum. They lit up with a dazzling purple light, dragging long purple flames behind them. As time passed, the distance between the 2 sides continued to shrink. 200 kilometers, 180 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 120 kilometers. After 15 minutes, the distance between the 2 sides had shrunk to about 20 kilometers. At such a close distance, The two heaven-conquering battleships were already within the attack range of Tianqing's battleship. Tianqing decisively opened the main cannon of the heaven-conquering battleship and blasted out a dazzling golden beam of light. Boom! Following a loud explosion, the 10,000 feet long golden beam of light with destructive power blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the left. Tianqing and the others were surprised by what happened next. The heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it had been locked onto and had nowhere to run. Before it died, it actually released 3 dazzling purple beams of light that blasted toward the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Kaboom! In the next instant, a deafening explosion erupted. The golden beam of light blasted the heaven-conquering battleship on the left into smithereens, bursting into golden flames. The entire heaven-conquering battleship was destroyed. Hundreds of heaven-conquering battleships and the captain of the Golden Armor battleship were blasted into smithereens. However, at the same time, the 3 purple beams of light struck the heaven-conquering battleship on the right. Bam! Following a muffled explosion, the heaven-conquering battleship was forcefully pushed 50 kilometers away. Furthermore, after the 3 purple beams of light were absorbed, its speed also doubled. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-conquering battleship on the right had traveled 500 kilometers, leaving Tianqing's battleship in the dust. There's such a thing? Jike's eyes widened as he looked at the heaven-conquering battleship with a shocked expression. Yunyao also frowned and said in a low voice, the heaven-conquering battleship on the left knew that it was going to die, so it helped its teammate before it died. It looks like they were already prepared and planned. Tianqing said in a playful tone. You mean they were bait released by Marshal Ruyang to lure us into an ambush? Yunyao nodded and said, it's possible. Haha. Tianqing chuckled and said, if that's the case, then I'll have to keep the battleship and not destroy it immediately. After all, it still has to lead us to Marshal Ruyang and the heaven-destroying army. Upon hearing this, Yunyao and Jike understood what he meant and gripped their divine swords and divine spears tightly. Very quickly 2 hours passed. A huge island appeared in front of them. The island was formed by pitch-black reefs, with a circumference of over 1,000 miles, standing alone on the ocean surface. The island was covered with a primitive jungle, and it was extremely dense. The heaven-slicing battleship, which was fleeing in panic, unleashed the last of its strength and charged towards the island without regard for anything else. Shwa! A few breaths later, the heaven-slicing battleship entered the island and disappeared into the depths of the forest. At this time, Tianqing's battleship flew across the sky unhurriedly and flew towards the island. When they were 200 miles away from the island, Yunyao and Jike both raised their eyebrows and a cold light flashed in their eyes. Tianqing, there are more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships 50 miles under the sea to our left. Brother Tianqing, there are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the depths of the sea to our right. Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. He pointed to the top of his head and chuckled. There are also more than a dozen heaven-slicing battleships hidden in the sky above us. Obviously, this is an ambush arranged by Marshal Ruyang and he's waiting for us to take the bait. Although he said so, he had no intention of slowing down. He controlled the battleship to continue flying towards the island. Yunyao couldn't help but ask, since we've already discovered them, why are we still entering the island? Tianqing, aren't you worried that Marshal Ruyang has some kind of killer move? Tianqing said calmly. He's just a 5th heaven true god and 300 heaven-slicing battleship captains. What kind of killer move can he have? Unless the heaven-slicing great emperor, the emperor's son, and the queen goddess are lying in ambush here at the same time, they won't be a threat to us. The rest of the heaven-slicing battleships are all useless. When he finished speaking, Tianqing's battleship had already flown to the top of the island and stopped in the air above a vast forest. At this time, a purple light shot up into the sky around the island and a barrier that covered the sky appeared. Swoosh! In just 2 breaths, the dark purple light barrier covered a radius of 1,000 miles and sealed the entire island. This was a super divine formation that was made up of 9 great formations. Its power was infinitely close to the heavenly god tier. After the formation was activated, a majestic divine power pressed down and froze the space within 1,000 miles. Then purple lights lit up under the sea and in the sky around the island. Swoosh! 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 Hundreds of heaven-slicing battleships descended from the sky like huge black beasts and surged out from the sea. After a while, the numerous battleships formed a huge circle and surrounded the island. Every battleship opened up the divine cannons on the side and aimed hundreds of cannons at the island. One after another, captains in golden armor appeared in the sky with more than 100 heaven-slicing battleships. Suddenly, the sky around the island was filled with battleships filled with murderous intent. Tens of thousands of warriors in black armor stood in the sky. They held swords, spears, swords, and halberds in their hands and stared at the island covetously. The scene in front of him was not out of Ji Tianqing's expectations. He remained calm as he scanned the sky indifferently and said, 160 battleships and 30,000 heaven-slicing battleships. It looks like a few dozen battleships have been sent out as bait. There are also 100 battleships and 10,000 heaven-slicing battleships. They are Marshal Ruyang's trump cards and are guarding the heaven-slicing divine palace. Ji Ke said in a serious tone, Brother Tianqing, the other party has set up a divine formation and so many people in ambush. What's your plan? Ji Tianqing shook his head and said, in the face of absolute power, these schemes and tricks are useless. I don't have a plan. I'll just act according to the situation and slaughter to my heart's content. Ji Ku and Yun Yao looked at each other and both of them revealed a helpless expression. Just as the three of them were talking, a black battleship that was 20,000 feet long and looked like a giant shark descended from the sky and landed in the fleet. Swoosh! This ferocious-looking and domineering battleship was Marshal Ruyang's battleship. The captains in golden armor and heaven-slicing battleships looked at the marshal's battleship and bowed slightly to show their respect. After the battleship stopped, the huge and heavy cabin door opened. Ka. A skinny purplish-black man walked out of the battleship. He was wearing a dark golden helmet, purple armor, and a dark golden cape. He exuded a domineering and majestic aura. 8 heaven-slicing martial gods in golden armor followed behind him with swords and sabers hanging from their waists. They were obviously his guards. This skinny heaven-slicing martial god was Marshal Ruyang. He stood proudly in the sky and stared at Tianqing's battleship on the island with a smug smile. Chapter 2687. Ji Tianqing. Welcome to the Black Sun Planet. Ban Shuai has been waiting for you for more than 2 years. You are finally here. Marshal Ruyang laughed coldly. His voice reverberated in the air above the island. For many years, there have been legends about you in our tribe. It is said that you killed the southern and eastern marshals and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of our soldiers. Now it seems that the rumors are exaggerated. With your ability and intelligence, Ban Shuai wonders how you managed to survive until today. More than 100 golden armored warship captains and 30,000 soldiers stared at the Tianqing warship on the island. Hearing Marshal Qingyang's words, everyone sneered disdainfully and mockingly. A few generals even waved their swords and shouted, Bastard Ji Tianqing, come out and face your death. Ji Tianqing, you must be terrified and desperate right now, right? Ha ha ha. Little bastard, only death awaits you if you go against our tribe. Marshal Ruyang is here. Tianqing, you little brat, kowtow and surrender. Ji Tianqing, do you dare to show yourself and fight? The crowd's shouts ignited the blood of many soldiers. Their fighting spirit soared. At the same time, inside the Tianqing warship, Ji Tianqing told Yun Yao and Ji Ku, Ku, you will control the warship. Yao Yao, you will fight with me. Ji Ku knew that it was safer to stay in the warship. She quickly objected and said firmly, Brother Tianqing, I will fight with you. Let senior sister control the warship. Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, Yun Yao shook her head and refused. She said calmly, Ku, the three of us are the most important people to each other. We are bound together for good or ill. No matter who it is, nothing will happen to them. On top of that, Tianqing needs my cooperation to cast the heavenly deity skill and break the ceiling formation. Ji Ku was at a loss for words. He was filled with worry. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao didn't say anything more and flew out in a flash. Shua! The husband and wife appeared together and stood high in the sky, looking down at Marshal Ruyang from above. Both of them were dressed in white. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and their auras were noble and elegant. just like the gods of the 9 heavens. The tens of thousands of pairs of eyes around the island immediately focused on the two of them. Ji Tianqing looked at Marshal Ruyang indifferently and sneered. Ruyang, is this island the place you chose to bury yourself? Haha. More than 30,000 people will be buried with you. Your life is worth it. His domineering voice spread over a radius of 1,000 miles. The 30,000 plus people could clearly hear the fluent language of the Heaven Punisher. Many of the Heaven Punisher soldiers were instantly enraged. They started to curse and roar. Marshal Ruyang furrowed his brows. Then his brows relaxed and he sneered disdainfully. I've long heard that your strength isn't that great, but your tone is extremely arrogant. Today I see that it's true. Ben Shuai really can't understand. You're already surrounded and about to be turned into ashes under the bombardment of thousands of cannons. How can you still have the courage to talk nonsense here? Instead of arguing, why don't you just stretch out your neck and commit suicide on the spot? That way you can die a more dignified death. Moreover, Ben Shuai will be merciful and let go of your 2 wives. Ben Shuai will take your head and ask the great emperor for a reward. After Ben Shuai's meteoric rise, he will definitely take good care of your wives. Ha ha ha. Ji Tianqing sneered contemptuously. His voice was so loud that it could pierce through gold and crack rocks. People as pitifully stupid as you are getting rarer and rarer. Forget it, I don't want to waste my breath on you. Before you die, I'll give you a piece of advice. You won't have a chance to use the trump card that you've been keeping. Gather all the 10,000 heaven-slaying dogs here. As he spoke, Ji Tianqing looked around and pointed at the 30,000 soldiers in the sky. He said disdainfully, these useless soldiers and crab generals are not enough for me to kill. They're far from enough. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Not only was Marshal Ruyang shocked and angry, but his eyes were also filled with murderous intent. The 30,000 Heaven Punisher soldiers were so angry that their faces turned red. Their blood was flowing in reverse. All of them roared and roared. What an arrogant bastard! If the heavens want a man to die, they must first make him mad. This bastard has gone mad. Ha 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 ha. What a joke. Ji Tianqing is so arrogant that he's lost his mind. Ji Tianqing, go ahead and be as arrogant as you like. These are your last words anyway. Marshal, are you still wasting time on that lunatic? Give the order to kill him. It's not enough to just kill Ji Tianqing. We must cut him into pieces and grind his bones to dust. Curses and roars resounded in the sky one after another. Especially the 100 or so golden armor captains. All of them looked like they had been injected with chicken blood. Their morale and fighting spirit were high. Marshal Zhuoyang calmed down and stared at Ji Tianqing. He put on a pitiful look and sigh. Ji Tianqing, who was hailed as the strongest opponent of our race, has lost his mind in a hopeless situation. He has become the biggest joke in the world. Since you want to die, Ben Shuai will give you a quick death. Marshal Ruyang waved his hand and ordered, everyone listen up. Activate the Samsara Annihilation Formation and kill Ji Tianqing. The 160 captains of the golden armored ships replied in unison. Then, everyone channeled their energy and shot out a red light into the Samsara Annihilation Formation. In an instant, the Samsara Annihilation Formation's power more than doubled and started to operate quickly. More than 90 million purple light blades appeared in the formation. They poured down like a snowstorm and drowned the entire island. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Every purple light blade was comparable to the attack of a first-level true god. The endless light blades flew back and forth and immediately shredded the island into pieces, turning it into sand and dust that fell into the sky. However, Tianqing's battleship was safe and sound. The light blades could not hurt it at all. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were in the endless light blades and were also unharmed. Haha, you dare to call this crude formation the Samsara Annihilation Formation? You're just a frog at the bottom of a well. Hilarious. Ji Tianqing sneered disdainfully and held the burial of heaven sword tightly with both hands. Yun Yao and he had a telepathic connection. They did not need to talk and she understood what he meant. She immediately took out the Source Stone Divine Sword. Then the two of them started to use their techniques. They pushed their god power to the limit, and their bodies lit up with divine light that shot into the sky. sword breaking 9 heavens. In the next moment, Ji Tianqing and Yunniao shouted at the same time and swung their divine swords toward the south. Suddenly, endless golden divine light gushed out from the two divine swords, forming a 300-mile-long 9 heavens divine dragon in the sky. Roar! Accompanied by a dragon roar that tore heaven and earth and shook the universe. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword aura slashed the dark purple divine light shield in an invincible manner. At this moment, the sun and moon lost their light and heaven and earth lost their color. The spirit chi of heaven and earth within 100,000 miles was sucked dry. The hearts of more than 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-punishing army stopped beating instantly, and they all looked terrified. Chapter 2688. No one could believe it. The 300-mile-long divine dragon sword shadow in the sky was released by Ji Tianqing. It was so powerful that it could swallow the heavens and the earth. The power and aura of that sword had exceeded the knowledge of many members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ruyang knew that even the great emperor of the Heaven Punisher, who was half a step away from becoming a heavenly god, might not be able to unleash such a terrifying attack. Thus, his heart felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar, and his entire body was cold. Kaboom! In the next moment, a loud explosion that shook the universe erupted and resounded through the clouds. Marshal Ruyang had spent countless resources to set up the 1,000-mile-wide array, but it had been shattered by the divine dragon sword shadow. A huge crack tore the formation into two halves, and purple light fragments splattered out in all directions. A destructive storm followed the divine dragon sword shadow, and swept toward the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher. Marshal Ruyang reacted the fastest. He immediately teleported away when he realized that a disaster was about to befall him. However, the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher were instantly destroyed. Boom! 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 The divine dragon sword shadow's power did not decrease as it slashed into the crowd. At least 5,000 members of the Heaven Punisher, and more than 30 battleships were hit by the divine dragon sword shadow. These people and battleships did not have the chance to dodge or fight back. They were instantly blasted into pieces. The sky that had been filled with people was immediately cleared out. Immediately after, a devastating storm swept over. The storm passed through the empty space and affected more than 4,000 members of the Heaven Punisher, and more than 20 battleships. Swoosh! The members of the Heaven Punisher were shattered in the storm, and the battleships also collapsed. Billions of pieces and debris were blown thousands of miles away by the storm and scattered in the vast ocean. After a long while, the earth-shattering storm finally dissipated. The island regained its peace. The divine array within a 1,000-mile-wide radius gradually collapsed. The huge pirate fleet also disappeared. The place where it had been turned into a blue sea with huge waves. A huge gap appeared in the encirclement in the sky. The southern region was empty. Only the battleships and members of the Heaven Punisher from the east, west, and north were left. There were only 100 battleships left, and the number of members of the Heaven Punisher decreased by 10,000. There were only 20,000 of them left. An invisible and terrifying aura enveloped the sea. The hearts and souls of the survivors were filled with shock and fear. The soldiers of the heavenly expedition, who had been full of fighting spirit and killing intent, were all listless like eggplants that had been hit by frost. Shwa! Golden and blue lights flashed. Ji Tianqing and Yunniao stepped out and stood proudly in the sky. Behind them, the 2,000 Zhonglong Tianqing battleship floated quietly in the sky. The 100 cannons on the side of the ship were all opened, preparing for an attack that could destroy heaven and earth. The world was silent. Marshal Ruyang, who had fled thousands of miles away, was lucky enough to escape. While the soldiers were not paying attention, he quietly flew back into the crowd and stood still. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's cold voice came from the sky. I've said it before, these chickens and dogs are not enough for me to kill. Jingyang, it's not too late to surrender now. When I swing my sword again, you will die without a burial ground. The cold and emotionless voice was like a heavy hammer that slammed into Marshal Ruyang's heart. He was filled with fear and looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes that were about to pop out of their sockets. This moment he finally understood. No wonder Ji Tianqing could destroy the Southern Expedition fleet and kill the Eastern Expedition Marshal, and live until today unscathed. No wonder Ji Tianqing dared to step into the Black Sun with only 2 wives. Turned out that he was so powerful. The rumors of the heavenly expedition were not true at all. Ji Tianqing's true strength was far more terrifying than the rumors said. Thinking of this, Marshal Ruyang felt a trace of regret in his heart. If he had known that Ji Tianqing was so powerful, he would not have harbored such extravagant hopes and insisted on staying on the Black Sun. If he had given up on the Black Sun and escaped without fighting, he could have preserved his strength and life. But now it was too late to say anything. Marshal Ruyang was silent. He was full of hesitation and conflict. However, more than 100 captains and 20,000 soldiers of the heavenly expedition all looked at him. How could he surrender to Ji Tianqing in front of so many people? How could he maintain his position in the heavenly expedition race after suffering such humiliation? In the blink of an eye, Marshal Ruyang made up his mind. He pulled himself together and looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. He shouted, "Ji Tianqing, so what if you're very strong? You don't understand the heavenly expedition race. We cannot be corrupted by wealth, and we cannot submit to power. Even if you can destroy the bodies of our warriors, you will never be able to destroy our unyielding loyal souls. The heavenly expedition race will never submit." His powerful voice reverberated in the air above the sea. The extinguished fighting spirit of the soldiers was immediately reignited. Countless people's blood boiled, and hope reappeared in their eyes. We will rather die than submit. Fight to the end. Fight to the death with him. We would rather die standing than live kneeling. Many martial gods and soldiers of the heavenly expedition race waved their weapons and shouted with high fighting spirit. Ji Tianqing didn't say anything. He only raised the sword of burial of heaven expressionlessly, and used his ultimate killing move. Sword rain. He put his left hand behind his back and pointed the sword at the sky with his right hand. His voice was as loud as a bell. Suddenly tens of thousands of stars lit up in the sky. Countless giant swords thousands of feet long fell from the sky. Before the swords arrived, an invisible force that suppressed the heavens and shattered everything had already sealed off the area within 1,000 miles. Marshal Ruyang and the 20,000 soldiers were suppressed by the invisible force. Their faces turned pale and their bodies bent. They stubbornly raised their heads and looked at the sky. When they saw the tens of thousands of meteors shooting down, everyone's eyes widened. Fear and despair filled their eyes. Boom! 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 Finally, the tens of thousands of meteor swords fell and drowned the sea within 1,000 miles. The heavens and earth became silver and bright. It was so bright that no one could open their eyes. Most of the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race closed their eyes forever under the attack of the giant swords. Along with the deafening explosion, countless whirlpools appeared in the ocean, and waves splashed out. Groups of soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were killed by the giant swords. Pieces of flesh and blood were thrown into the air. Crimson and purple blood fell into the sea and dyed the blue sea dark red. Battleships after battleships were cut in half by the giant swords and fell into the sea. But this was only the beginning of the disaster. Yunyao also swung the Dawnstone Divine Sword and shot out Starlight Sword auras. Swish! Swish! The sword auras were like shuttles, crescent moons, waterfalls, and rivers. They flew across the heavens and earth. Anyone who was struck by the sword light was instantly crushed to pieces and killed on the spot. Jike didn't stay idle either. He controlled the Tianqing battleship to unleash the strongest power, and kept shooting out golden light beams. The golden light beams were as dense as a rainstorm and bombarded the sea repeatedly. Facing such a terrifying attack, the soldiers of the heavenly expedition race were terrified and had no chance to fight back. Even Marshal Qingyang was forced to flee in a sorry state, dodging all over the place. Chapter 2689. 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army against Ji Tianqing and his 2 companions. This was a battle where there was a huge disparity in numbers. It should have been a one-sided battle. In the end, it was indeed a one-sided massacre. However, the targets of the massacre were the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army, who outnumbered the enemy by 10,000. In the midst of the massacre, Marshal Ruyang led many captains and launched a desperate counterattack. However, the results were minimal. They could not hurt Ji Tianqing and his two companions at all. The massacre lasted for a full 45 minutes before it gradually stopped. It was not because Ji Tianqing and his two companions had exhausted their divine power and were unable to continue. It was because almost all 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army had been killed. Corpses were everywhere in the chaotic thousand-mile sea. The surface of the sea was dyed dark red. All the warships had been destroyed, including Marshal Ruyang's ship. An extremely small number of survivors gathered around Marshal Zhuoyang, their hearts filled with despair and despair. They saw Marshal Ruyang standing in the middle. Beside him were 6 captains covered in blood. Behind him were more than 60 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army, who were wearing black armor and missing limbs. Only so few of the 30,000 soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were left. They were all seriously injured and were at the end of their rope. Everyone was in complete despair. They gave up resisting and running away. On the other hand, Ji Tianqing and his two companions were safe and sound. They stood calmly in the sky. Ji Tianqing looked at Marshal Ruyang and his companions expressionlessly. He slowly raised his left hand. Destructive divine power was accumulating in his body. In the next moment, he only needed to punch out and Marshal Ruyang and his companions would be reduced to ashes. At this moment of life and death, the hearts of the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army were in their throats. Their eyes were filled with despair. Marshal Ruyang hesitated for a moment. He took 2 steps forward and shouted anxiously, "Wait!" Ji Tianqing's left hand was clenched into a fist. It stopped in midair and he looked at him expressionlessly. "Marshal Ruyang, what else do you have to say?" Marshal Ruyang made up his mind and bowed without hesitation. "Ji Tianqing, Ben Shuai was blind and should not have ambushed you here. Ben Shuai admits defeat. I surrender to you now. You're a peerless expert and we're just weak ants that can't threaten you at all. Why do you have to kill us all?" The dozens of soldiers behind him also knelt in the sky and kowtowed in unison, begging for mercy. "We are willing to surrender. Please spare our lowly lives, let us live." Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile. "Ha ha ha. Just now, who was the one who passionately said that I don't understand the Heaven Punishers? And who was it that said righteously that the Heaven Punishers were loyal souls who would rather die than submit? Now, it seems like I really don't understand the Heaven Punishers." The thick sense of mockery caused Marshal Qingyang and the others' faces to turn red, and they felt extremely ashamed and angry. However, everyone lowered their heads and did not dare to refute. What was there to refute? Just now, the soldiers had been beating their chests and shouting, as if they were facing death calmly and righteously. Now they were kneeling and surrendering, without any dignity or backbone. The words they said were like farts. How fragrant! Seeing that no one had anything to say, Ji Tianqing did not waste any more time. His left fist lit up with a dazzling divine light. Marshal Ruyang saw that he was unwilling to forgive them and immediately became worried. He decided to throw caution to the wind and roared at the top of his lungs, "Ji Tianqing, stop! As long as you spare our lives, I'm willing to tell you a huge secret. Really, only a dozen people know this secret. You'll definitely be interested." Ji Tianqing was indeed interested. The divine light in his left hand disappeared. "Oh, what secret?" When Marshal Qingyang saw the opportunity, he quickly explained, "This secret is related to the great emperor of our clan and the gods of the upper realm. However, I can only tell you alone." Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "All right. If that's the case, I'll spare your life for now. As for the others..." As he spoke, he waved his left hand and shot out dozens of dazzling golden lights. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Dozens of golden sword lights cut through the sky and instantly pierced the Heaven Punishers beside Marshal Ruyang. Bang bang bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the bodies of the 6 captains and more than 60 soldiers of the heavenly expedition exploded, their bodies smashed into pieces. In the sky, only Ji Tianqing, the other 2, and Marshal Ruyang were left. Marshal Ruyang trembled as he witnessed the Heaven Punishers being killed in seconds. He was furious. However, his rationality soon overcame his anger. He tried his best to remain calm and looked coldly at Ji Tianqing. He gritted his teeth and said, "Ji Tianqing, you're so vicious." Ji Tianqing sneered disapprovingly, "Ha! If you continue to spout nonsense, you'll be the next one to die." Marshal Ruyang's expression froze and he quickly shut his mouth. Ji Tianqing retracted his left hand and led Yunyao and Jiku across the sky. They flew to Marshal Ruyang and stood still. "Now you should tell us the secret." Marshal Ruyang looked at Yunyao and Jiku. He hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, "This is the top secret of my clan. Only the Emperor, Empress, Prince, Left and Right Protectors, Imperial Tutor, and the 5 marshals know about it. Nobody else knows about it. I didn't know about it before. After Marshal Zhendong died and I took over his position, I found out about this secret." Ji Tianqing and the other 2 did not reply. They listened attentively. Marshal Ruyang said with a serious expression, "On the surface, the upper realms deities value our clan. They use God's grace, divine light, and other means to help our clan develop and strengthen. However, in reality, our clan is just a pawn in the hands of the upper realms deities. We're lackeys that they've carefully cultivated. Our clan conquering the stars, invading the major galaxies, and dominating the Trichiliocosm were all ordered by the upper realms deities." Ji Tianqing frowned and asked, "Why would the upper realms deities do this? The Trichiliocosm is a mortal world after all. The deities don't care about it at all." "I don't know the specific reason either." Marshal Ruyang shook his head and said in a low voice, "I only know that this is the plan of the upper realms deities. It seems to be related to an ancient legend." "What ancient legend?" Yunyao asked with a serious expression. Marshal Ruyang shook his head blankly, indicating that he did not know. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Go on." Marshal Ruyang continued, "Other than ordering our clan to dominate the Trichiliocosm, the upper realms deities also gave an oracle to the Great Emperor. After that, the Great Emperor gave a secret order to all the marshals to search for a divine map in each of the major galaxies. This mission is very confidential and has always been carried out in secret." "Divine map?" Ji Tianqing narrowed his eyes. A glint flashed in his eyes and he asked in a low voice, "What divine map? Formation map? Divine weapon map or treasure map?" Marshal Ruyang smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know either. Even the Great Emperor can't clearly describe what the divine map looks like, or what its characteristics are. We only know that any divine map that is beyond the level of a true god must be collected and handed over to the Great Emperor for inspection." Chapter 2690. Ji Tianqing was very interested in the divine map. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. His heart was filled with questions and he wanted to find out the truth. Unfortunately, Marshal Ruyang knew very little about this. Even the Great Emperor of Heaven Punisher did not know what the divine map was that the upper realm deities wanted. Ji Tianqing was somewhat unwilling to give up. He tried to interrogate Marshal Huiyang in a roundabout way, but failed to get any useful information. After revealing these secrets, Marshal Ruyang was like a deflated balloon. He was dispirited. "Ji Tianqing, I've told you all the information and secrets I know. You should also fulfill your promise and let me live." Marshal Ruyang looked up at Ji Tianqing and said expressionlessly. However, before he could finish, Ji Tianqing interrupted him. "The top secret you mentioned is not only vague and ambiguous, but it's also hard to tell if it's true or false. I'll have to verify that you're telling the truth before I consider sparing your life." Marshal Ruyang frowned and asked cautiously, "How do I verify it?" "Search your soul, of course," Ji Tianqing said as he extended his right palm and released a mysterious black light that enveloped Marshal Ruyang. "No!" Marshal Ruyang turned pale with fright. He roared with grief and anger, "Ji Tianqing! You untrustworthy bastard! You're despicable and shameless!" As he cursed, he unleashed all his strength and tried to teleport away. However, his injuries were too severe. How could he escape from Ji Tianqing's grasp? In the next moment he was enveloped by the mysterious black light. An incomparably strong divine soul power invaded his body and tightly wrapped around his divine soul. Marshal Ruyang's soul suffered a heavy blow. His consciousness blurred and he fainted. After that, Ji Tianqing forcibly seized his soul's memories, causing his soul to be injured and he remained unconscious. After 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianqing finished refining Marshal Ruyang's memories and ended the spellcasting. He slowly withdrew the mysterious black light and slapped the unconscious Marshal Ruyang with his palm, killing him instantly. When facing the Heaven Punishers, there was no need to talk about morality or trust. Moreover, he had never promised Marshal Ruyang that he would let Marshal Ruyang live. When Yunyao and Jiku saw that he had killed Marshal Ruyang, they both asked about the situation. Tianqing, is Marshal Ruyang's secret true or false? Big brother Tianqing, have you already gotten the answer? Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and answered, I've already refined Marshal Ruyang's memories, so I have a better understanding of the Heaven Punisher race. He wasn't lying. Everything he said was true. The Heaven Punishers were indeed the lackeys of the deities of the upper realm. They were ordered by the deities of the upper realm to invade all the major star zones in an attempt to dominate the 3,000 worlds. During this process, they were secretly searching for the whereabouts of the divine map. They collected many treasures that seemed to be the divine map and handed them to the Heaven Punisher for inspection. Yunyao frowned and thought for a while, then asked, the deities of the upper realm ordered the Heaven Punishers to invade the 3,000 worlds because of an ancient legend. What legend is it? Ji Tianqing was silent for a moment, then said calmly, maybe it has something to do with the Five Elements world? After all, the Five Elements world is the most special star among the 3,000 worlds. It once coexisted with the heavenly realm and the dragon realm. It's an eternal main world. Jiku came to a sudden realization and quickly nodded. That's right. Big brother Tianqing's analysis is right. It's very possible. Yunyao nodded slightly. It's indeed possible. Many years ago, the Heaven Punishers knew about the existence of the Dawn Stones and reported this to the deities of the upper realm. The deities of the upper realm were also very interested in the Dawn Stones and ordered the Heaven Punishers to do their best to steal them. If the deities of the upper realm let the Heaven Punishers dominate the 3,000 worlds in order to find the Five Elements world, then everything that happened before makes sense. Ji Tianqing and Jiku nodded in agreement. After a moment of silence, Jiku asked again, Big brother Tianqing, you've refined Marshal Ruyang's memories. Do you know what the divine map that the deities of the upper realm are looking for is? Ji Tianqing shook his head and explained, Marshal Ruyang's position is lower, so he only knows a little. He doesn't know the details. The person who knows the most about this should be the Heaven Punisher. However, there's something you need to take note of. The deities of the upper realm can interfere with the heavenly Tao's rules and help the Heaven Punishers avoid the 9 heavenly tribulations. This means that the deities are at least at the peak of the God King stage. The divine map that they want is definitely a treasure above the God King stage. Coincidentally, I have a formation that surpasses the God King stage and is infinitely mysterious. Ji Tianqing was talking about the Heaven Punisher formation, hidden under the chaotic fog in Qinshin's tomb. 1,000 years ago, Qinshin had obtained the Heaven Punisher formation after a near-death experience in some ancient ruins. This item was known as the ultimate mystery of the God realm and contained the secret of immortality. Therefore, countless God Kings went crazy for it and tried to steal it at all costs. Qinshin's death was definitely related to the Heaven Punisher formation. Jiku had participated in the Great War of the Gods and knew the reason why Qinshin was surrounded by so many God Kings. When she heard Ji Tianqing's words, she trembled and immediately understood what Ji Tianqing meant. Big brother Tianqing, you mean the Heaven Punisher formation? It's very possible. Ji Tianqing nodded. Jika's eyes widened and she said in disbelief, We've already died 1,000 years ago and the Heaven Punisher formation disappeared with us. Those bastards from the God realm are still thinking about the Heaven Punisher formation and won't give up until they find it? Jika paused for a moment. She thought of something even more terrifying and said with a complicated expression, if the God realm deities from the upper realm are asking the Heaven Punisher tribe to find the Heaven Punisher formation, then that means the deities behind the Heaven Punisher tribe are the God Kings from back then. There are mortal enemies. Yunyao's expression also changed and she said in a serious tone, I'm afraid that the current God realm is no longer the same. The ones in power are most likely the God Kings. Even though Tianqing has died 1,000 years ago, they haven't given up on searching for the Heaven Punisher formation. It looks like even if we ascend to the God realm, we might not be safe. We'll definitely face greater danger. After the three of them analyzed the situation, the truth gradually surfaced. Ji Tianqing smiled and said in a playful tone, Fate is indeed a debt knot that can't be untied. Even though I've died 1,000 years ago and reincarnated, I still can't escape fate. In the end, I have to fight to the death with those bastards and settle my grudges. The Heaven Punisher tribe, the 5 elemental world, and the Heaven Punisher formation are the things that led me to the path of revenge. Whether we know it or not, whether we're willing or not, we can't escape fate's arrangement. Yunyao also nodded and said, in the mortal world, we have to fight to the death with the Heaven Punisher tribe. Even if we ascend to the God realm, we have to solve the mystery and take revenge on those God kings. Jika looked at the sky with a burning gaze and said in a determined tone, in this life we definitely won't lose. Chapter 2691. After a while, Ji Tianqing and the other two left the ocean and headed for the Divine Palace. Marshal Ruyang, 160 captains and 30,000 soldiers of the Divine Palace had been killed. However, there were still more than 100 captains and 10,000 soldiers of the Divine Palace. If they didn't get rid of these people, the Black Sun would still be under the rule of the Divine Palace. Half a day later, Ji Tianqing and the other two flew to the depths of the ocean and stopped in the clouds. Even though they were surrounded by white clouds in all directions and looked hazy and illusory under the golden sunlight, they were still in a daze. However, Ji Tianqing had refined Marshal Ruyang's memories. He knew that there was a dazzling heaven-punishing divine palace in the sea of clouds 5 kilometers ahead. He also knew all the secrets of the divine palace, including the layout of the divine palace, the defensive arrays, the strength of the guards and the amount of resources stored in it. Ji Tianqing stood in the clouds and used the divine eye secret technique to look at the sky in front of him. There was a great maze formation in the sea of clouds that covered a radius of 100 kilometers, protecting the heaven-punishing divine palace and concealing it. Ji Tianqing quickly saw through the great maze formation and used the method to break it, breaking the divine formation. Swish! As a bright purple light flashed, the maze array collapsed. A sacred golden divine palace that was 200 miles wide appeared in front of the three of them. Ji Tianqing used a small trick to break 2 defensive divine arrays. Then he took Yunyao and Jiku into the divine palace. Inside the temple, countless divine formations had been set up, as well as an inescapable ambush. The hundreds of captains guarding the temple and the tens of thousands of soldiers of the heaven-conquering army had already received the warning. When Ji Tianqing and the other two entered the range of the divine palace, they attacked without hesitation. Dozens of true god-level arrays were activated, releasing light pillars and light blades that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, raining down on Ji Tianqing and the other two. More than 50 warships and hundreds of golden-armored captains surrounded Ji Tianqing and the other two, launching a fierce siege. The tens of thousands of soldiers of the Heaven Crusade also formed a huge encirclement. They formed a battle formation and joined forces to unleash attacks that could destroy heaven and earth, drowning Ji Tianqing and the other two like a flood. A battle that shook the heavens and the earth with a shocking momentum had just begun. Ji Tianqing and his wife each displayed their strengths. They all erupted with their strongest strength and used their most powerful divine arts. Endless sword flashes, spear flashes, and divine arts flashed through the sky, shattering the attacks of the heaven punishers. Rumble! Loud sounds reverberated in the sky. Violent divine power shockwaves spread out like ripples, covering a radius of 1,000 miles. As time passed, the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army continued to suffer casualties, and their numbers decreased rapidly. The majestic and dignified heaven-punishing divine palace had also been destroyed by the shockwaves of the battle. It had been reduced to ruins, and broken walls could be seen everywhere. This battle lasted for a full 15 minutes before it stopped. The result was self-evident. Hundreds of heaven-conquering warships had been destroyed, and they had been reduced to rubble and scrap metal. Nearly 100 golden-armored captains had been killed, and none of them had a complete corpse. Tens of thousands of heaven-conquering army soldiers had also been killed, and they had all been reduced to ashes. Originally, There had been a few hundred guards and servants in the heaven-punishing divine palace. In this earth-shattering battle, they had also suffered and were killed one after another. After the battle ended, the heavens and the earth were dead silent. The heaven-punishing divine palace had been reduced to ruins. Only broken walls and rubble were left, and smoke was still rising from them. The heaven-conquering army soldiers guarding the divine palace had all died. Corpses and purple bloodstains could be seen in the ruins. However, Jitianqing, Yunyao, and Jiku were still standing in the sky, safe and sound. Other than using a large amount of divine power, they had not suffered any substantial injuries. After resting for a while, the three of them began to search for the treasury in the ruins. Marshal Ruyang had specially reinforced the treasury in the divine palace, and he had even set up a powerful defensive divine array. Therefore, the entire divine palace had been reduced to ruins, but the treasury had been preserved. Jitianqing had Marshal Ruyang's memories, so he easily found the treasury's location. An hour later, the three of them had emptied the treasury of all the divine items and resources. Those divine items and resources had been plundered by the heaven-conquering army from the entire Green Sun galaxy. There were so many of them that it was difficult to count, and their value was also immeasurable. Jitianqing, Yunyao, and Jika's spatial rings were all full, but they had only taken 1/3 of it. Jitianqing had put the remaining 2/3 of the treasures and resources into the sword world of the burial of heaven. After all, the sword world was a special small world. After so many years of expansion, the sword world had already reached a radius of 100 million miles, and it could accommodate billions of living beings. The three of them returned with a full load, and they left the Green Sun galaxy on the Tianqing warship. There were still dozens of captains and 6,000 heaven-conquering army soldiers left on the 4 continents of the Green Sun galaxy. However, those people had scattered, and Jitianqing was too lazy to waste time killing them one by one. He had already done a great favor by killing Marshal Ruyang and the main force of the heaven-conquering army. The fate of the Green Sun galaxy had nothing to do with him. Swoosh! The Tianqing warship passed through the Azure Light Shield, left the Green Sun galaxy, and returned to the Dark Void. On the way back to the Five Elements world, Jitianqing had also come up with a plan. Only 20% of the treasures and resources we plundered from the heaven-conquering palace are divine level. We will keep them for our own use. The remaining 80% of the normal resources and treasures will be placed in the Five Elements world. This way, the Five Elements world's resources will be more abundant, and its power will be stronger. Yao Yao Cuckoo, what do you think? There were many ways to restore the power of the Five Elements world and make it stronger. Devouring and refining planets was only one of them. Investing large amounts of resources and treasures in the Five Elements world was another way. Yunyao and Jiku did not have any objections, and they both nodded in agreement. Jiku smiled and said, "Big brother Tianqing, you are now the master of the Five Elements world, and you are one with it. You will live and die together. Strengthening the Five Elements world is also a way to increase your strength. Why would we object?" Yunyao thought for a moment and then advised Jitianqing, "Tianqing, how do you plan to distribute the 80% of cultivation resources? If possible, you should invest more treasures and resources in the Tianqian continent. After all, our parents and friends are still cultivating in the Tianqian continent." Jitianqing smiled approvingly and nodded. "I have the same idea. Of the 5 continents in the Five Elements world, only the Xinwu continent has the most abundant resources and the strongest martial artists. The other 4 continents are very barren, and their cultivation resources are limited. The achievements of their martial artists are also very limited. If we want the Five Elements world to quickly strengthen, we need to support the other 4 continents and provide them with abundant cultivation resources and techniques. I plan to start from the Tianqian continent." Chapter 2692. Ever since Jitianqing and the other 2 left the Tianqian continent, they had never returned. However, Jitianqing had gained control of the Five Elemental world, so he could understand the situation of the entire world. As long as he used his divine will, he would know everything that happened on the 5 continents like the back of his hand. Even if he did not enter the Tianqian continent, he could clearly see the situation there. Zhongzhou was becoming more and more prosperous. Various races were multiplying, and martial arts were flourishing. Everything was developing in a good direction. His father and Yunyao's parents were both in high positions. They had been cultivating peacefully, and their strength was increasing day by day. The monarch's residence was still at the peak of martial arts. They had nurtured a large number of outstanding princes and maintained the world's peace. The imperial court of Zhongzhou was a deterrent. They ruled the entire Tianxian continent and protected hundreds of millions of people. The imperial court of the demon race worked hard and educated hundreds of millions of people to become stronger. Everything was so familiar. Originally, Yunyao had planned to return to the Tianxian continent to visit her parents and relatives when she was free. However, Ji Tianqing persuaded her to give up on this idea. After Tianqing's battleship flew back to the five-elemental world, Ji Tianqing used a secret technique to show the situation of the Tianxian continent to Yunyao and Ji Ku. On the huge light screen, vast mountains, rivers, and bustling cities and tribes appeared. The scenes of Cloud Spirit Palace and the demon race's imperial court were also clearly displayed. Yunyao and Ji Ku saw their parents and relatives, as well as familiar homes and friends. They were deeply happy. After a full hour, Ji Tianqing finished casting the spell and removed the white light screen. He looked at Yunyao and Ji Ku and said earnestly, "Family is important, but what we need to do is not to reminisce about the past and waste time. We shoulder the sacred mission of protecting the five-elemental world and bear unimaginable dangers and hardships. What we need to do is silently protect the five-elemental world and protect them. Also, we need to resolve more and more dangers and difficulties and kill more powerful enemies. When our family and friends leave the Tianxian continent and step onto the Xunwu continent, I will make the appropriate arrangements for them." Yunyao and Ji Ku nodded to show that they understood. "Tianqing, we've already left the profound sky continent and been separated from our parents for more than 60 years. It's inevitable that we miss and worry about them. Now that my wish has been fulfilled, I know what to do. I won't waste any more time. Big brother Tianqing, thank you for helping me fulfill my wish. I'm relieved to see my parents and big brother grow up safely." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and continued, "Actually, I miss my father just like you. I really want to visit him. But I know that now is not the time. We'll wait until we've dealt with our enemies, eliminated the crisis, and achieved true peace. Only then will we reunite with them." Yunyao and Ji Ku both expressed their understanding and looked forward to that day coming as soon as possible. After that, the two of them entered the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda to recuperate. Ji Tianqing took out 80% of the cultivation resources and used the power of the world to transport them to the Tianxian land. Not long after, on the peaceful Tianxian land, there was a heavy rain of spiritual energy. Boundless five-colored spiritual qi converged into a torrential downpour, sprinkling over the entire continent. All living things were nurtured and grew healthily. Martial artists were nourished by the spiritual energy and increased their strength and broke through to the next realm. At the same time, there were also billions of treasures and cultivation resources scattered randomly across the land. After the news spread, it attracted countless martial artists to search for them with all their might. The martial artists who successfully found the treasures and resources received great fortuitous opportunities, and their strength increased by leaps and bounds. In the next few years, countless martial arts geniuses and elite warriors would emerge in the Tianxian land. They would enter an even more magnificent era of martial arts. Of course, the Central State Imperial Court, the Demon Imperial Court, the Eastern Sea Imperial Court, the Cloud Spirit Palace, the Imperial King Mansion, and the Tianshan region were the places that Ji Tianqing focused on. Countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures and cultivation resources had landed in these areas. Without a doubt, Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and Jika's parents and friends would receive great fortuitous opportunities. After finishing this matter, Ji Tianqing withdrew his divine power with satisfaction. He controlled the five-elemental world and continued to travel in the void. In the next 16 years, the five-elemental world continued to travel in the Azure Sun region. Along the way, Ji Tianqing and the others saved more than 50 worlds and destroyed more than 1,400 heaven-conquering battleships. They killed more than 200,000 heaven-conquering soldiers During this time, the news of the Azure Sun being rescued and the Eastern Marshal and Marshal Ryong being killed spread in the Azure Sun region. 200,000 of the survivors of the Eastern Expedition fleet were also killed by Ji Tianqing and the others. As a result, the Eastern Expedition fleet only existed in name and had fallen apart. The tens of thousands of surviving soldiers were divided into thousands of teams and fled the Azure Sun region in a hurry. They did not dare to stay and cause trouble. 16 years later, when the five elemental world left the Azure Sun region, the entire star region was rescued. More than 200 worlds regained their freedom. Although there were still a few heaven-conquering soldiers left in the star region, they could not cause any trouble. They were destined to be killed by the other races. The 17th year arrived. The five elemental world entered the Black Dragon Star region and began a new journey. The Black Dragon Star region was relatively close to the heaven-conquering star region. There was only the Fonggang Star region in between. More than 100 years ago, the Northern Expedition fleet of the heaven-conquering race had occupied the Black Dragon Star region. When Ji Tianqing and the others entered the Black Dragon Star region and rescued the various worlds, they discovered some serious problems. The heaven-conquering race had been operating in the Black Dragon Star region for more than 100 years. They were deeply rooted and powerful. Almost every world had a heaven-conquering general, 30 golden armored captains, and more than 3,000 heaven-conquering soldiers. In addition, the heaven-conquering race had enslaved the entire world. They had hundreds of millions of slaves and millions of martial artists as puppets. The puppets controlled by the heaven-conquering race were all martial Dao experts of various races. There were a small number of martial gods of foreign races, some martial saints, and a large number of tribulation realm experts. These native puppets were loyal to the heaven-conquering race and helped the heaven-conquering race firmly control the entire world. When Ji Tianqing rescued the various worlds, he had to spend more time and effort. That was because the martial Dao experts of the various worlds had become puppets. They would never resist the heaven-conquering race's rule. Not only did he have to kill the heaven-conquering race, but he also had to deal with a large number of puppets. Fortunately, the people and divine beasts around him were all true immortal realm experts. In the face of absolute power, the heaven-conquering race and puppets of the various worlds could only be crushed. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. They had rescued more than 20 worlds, killed 80,000 heaven-conquering soldiers and nearly 20 million heaven-conquering puppets. At this moment, the five elemental worlds stopped in the void. Ji Tianqing steered the battleship and took Yunyao Jiku and the White Dragon to a world tens of millions of miles away. Suddenly, a dazzling white light appeared in the void in front of them. It surged toward Tianqing's battleship like a flood. Chapter 2693. The Tianqing battleship was speeding through the void as fast as a ray of light. Ji Tianqing and the rest were on high alert when they saw the overwhelming white light in front of them. The four of them knew that there were all kinds of dangers hidden in the cold and silent void. The most common ones were void storms, folded spaces, extraterrestrial flames, and meteorites. Under normal circumstances, void storms were black in color. The dazzling white light in front of them was not void storms, extraterrestrial flames, or meteorites. Of course, it was not folded spaces either. After all, folded spaces could not move. They could only hide in the void. That's a divine skill attack. Someone is attacking us. The same thought flashed through Ji Tianqing, Yunyao Jiku, and Bai Long's minds at the same time. Although the white divine light was still 100,000 miles away from the battleship. To be safe, Ji Tianqing still controlled the Tianqing battleship to fly to the left to avoid the attack of the white divine light. However, the white divine light also changed direction and swept toward the Tianqing battleship. Ji Tianqing frowned when he saw this. His eyes were cold as he murmured, "They're really coming for us." At the same time, when the white divine light got closer, he found out that the white divine light was actually spatial energy. The pure and powerful spatial energy was like a river that was 10,000 miles long and was about to swallow the Tianqing battleship. Once the Tianqing battleship was swept by the white light, it would be strangled and cut by the spatial energy. Although the Tianqing battleship's quality had reached the heavenly god level, and it was unlikely to be torn into pieces. However, The mysterious spatial energy could send the battleship to an unknown area. It's actually spatial energy? Only heavenly god-level elites can master the spatial law. Who is the other party? How can they be so powerful? Or maybe they're using some kind of powerful divine weapon. While Ji Tianqing was puzzled, he used the spatial law without hesitation and released hundreds of giant white light blades. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of 10-mile-long white light blades instantly cut through the void and slashed at the long river of white light tens of thousands of miles away. With a series of muffled booms, the long river of white light was instantly shattered into pieces, splashing out billions of white light fragments. An earth-shattering shockwave containing countless fragments of white light blossomed in the void, spreading for tens of thousands of miles. The dark void was suddenly illuminated as bright as day, dazzling and dazzling. The fragments of white light transformed into powerful spatial energy, creating billions of spatial vortexes in the void. It was exceptionally beautiful. The Tianqing battleship was temporarily safe. Ji Tianqing and the other two did not let down their guard. They released their divine senses to search the surrounding void. Not long after, a huge black shadow appeared in the void in front of them. It was approaching them without making a sound. In just a few breaths of time, the long and narrow shadow arrived and stopped 100 miles away. Ji Tianqing took a closer look and realized that the black shadow was a black battleship that was 3,000 feet long. The long and narrow battleship was like a black dragon bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws. Its appearance was ferocious and domineering. There was a huge dragon head at the front of the battleship. Its bloody mouth was wide open, brewing purple divine light. Purple light flashed on both sides of the battleship, forming two huge wings of light that enabled the battleship to fly as fast as lightning. It really is the Heaven Punisher tribe. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with cold light as he sneered. Yun Yao observed for a moment and said in a low voice, "The quality and specifications of that battleship are comparable to the Heaven Punisher's battleship. However, the Heaven Punisher's battleship has already been destroyed." Jika added, in other words, the owner of this Heaven Punisher battleship is as powerful as the Heaven Punisher. It might even be the Heaven Punisher's battleship. Bai Long sneered with a mocking expression. If the Heaven Punisher is really here to kill us, then that would be great. However, he has already suffered at the hands of Master. Why would he come here to deliver his head on a silver platter? Yun Yao frowned and thought for a moment. If it's not the Heaven Punisher, then who could it be? The Empress Yun Shuyan? Or the Crown Prince Tian Shu? Ji Tianqing looked at the Heaven Punisher battleship 100 miles away and said with a smile, "The owner has already shown himself. We'll know when we see." As soon as he finished speaking, the Heaven Punisher battleship, which looked like a black dragon, opened its huge and heavy hatch. Crack, 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 crack. As the cabin door opened, a figure that was as black as ink walked out of the warship. It was over 30 meters tall. This burly figure looked somewhat similar to a human. He had 4 thick limbs and a strong body. A large head rested on his broad shoulders. Moreover, there were 99 dark blue lines on his black body that intersected with each other like meridians. 9 divine swords of different colors floated behind his back. They shone with colorful divine light. Following the appearance of this giant, an invisible pressure spread out in the void. Ji Tianqing looked at the giant for a moment and came to a conclusion. This man has the strength of a LV9 true immortal. He was the one who released the spatial white light. He should be the son of the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor Tian Shu. It's really him. The guy called the Astral War God? Yun Yao raised her eyebrows. Jiku asked in confusion, "That's strange. Isn't he the son of the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor? Why does he look like a giant? He doesn't look like a member of the Heaven Punisher race at all." Bai Long smiled evilly and said playfully, "He must be Yun Shuyan's son. However, I'm not sure if he's really the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor's son." Jika looked confused and asked in confusion, "Xiao Bai, what do you mean?" White Dragon laughed evilly, but he didn't explain. Ji Tianqing glanced at him and Jiku, then said with an indifferent expression, "Cuckoo, don't bother with little White. This kid's mouth is very poisonous." Oh. Jiku did not give up and asked, "Big brother Tianqing, Why doesn't Tianshu look like a member of the Heaven Punisher race? Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and explained seriously, Yun Shuyan is a water spirit. If she marries the Heaven Punisher Great Emperor, their child might not be a member of the Heaven Punisher race. Tianshu's bloodline will mutate, and he is highly regarded by the God Spirit. He has received enlightenment and guidance. Perhaps, he cultivated some special divine ability that changed his outer appearance. At that moment, Tianshu walked to the front of the ship and stood on the huge black dragon head. Two tall Heaven Punishers in purple and green robes walked out of the cabin and stood behind Tianshu. Tianshu looked coldly at Tianqing's battleship and sneered, Ji Tianqing, although we have never met, I have heard of your name. When I heard that you were going to planet Heaven Punisher, I hurried here to wait for you. What? I, the God of War, am here to welcome you. Do you not even have the courage to show yourself? Chapter 2694. Ever since Ji Tianqing took control of the Five Elements world to travel in the void and save various worlds, more than 30 years had passed since then. During this time he had destroyed the southern and eastern fleets and saved the Purple Cloud and Green Sunstar Zone. News of his deeds had long been sent back to the Heaven Punishers. Therefore, it was reasonable for Tianshu to come to the Black Dragon Star Zone to kill him. He was not surprised at all. However, the two Heaven Punishers behind Tianshu caught his attention. One of them wore a purple robe while the other wore a green robe. Both of them looked old and had white hair. Both of them had the same cultivation realm, which was 7th level True God realm. Ji Tianqing frowned as he pondered. LV7 True Immortal Realm? They're even more powerful than the Imperial Tutor and the Marshals. Looks like those two old guys are the left and right protectors. At this moment Tianshu was getting impatient. He sneered disdainfully, Ji Tianqing, are you going to hide in your battleship forever? I heard that you're arrogant and insufferably arrogant. I didn't expect you to be so timid and cowardly when I, the God of War, am here. Since you don't dare to show yourself, I'll destroy your turtle shell and drag you out. As soon as he finished speaking, Tianshu waved his hand and gave the order to attack. The battleship under his feet immediately opened the main cannon at the bow and launched a fatal attack. Boom! With a loud explosion, the black dragon's bloody mouth spat out a 10,000 zhonglong purple beam of light. The beam of light was like a dragon. It carried a terrifying power that could pierce through everything as it blasted toward Tianqing's battleship. Tianshu's lips curled into a mocking smile. He was waiting to see Tianqing's battleship being blasted to pieces. After all, his Black Dragon battleship had reached the Heavenly God grade. It was powerful enough to look down on the void and sweep through all 3,000 worlds. However, he frowned the next moment and the sneer on his face froze. Tianqing's battleship also released a dazzling golden divine light that blasted toward the purple beam of light. Kaboom! The two equally terrifying light pillars collided violently in the void, creating an earth-shattering boom. The light pillar collapsed at the same time, turning into millions of purple and golden fragments that scattered in all directions. The void within a radius of a few thousand miles was immediately illuminated by the fragments of divine light, creating a dazzling scene. Violent and devastating shockwaves whipped up a shocking storm in the void. After a long while, the storm gradually dissipated. The two warships remained motionless in the void, facing each other from 100 miles away. On the Black Dragon battleship, Tianshu was still standing proudly on the dragon's head. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold. He had already put away the contempt in his heart as he stared sharply at the Tianqing battleship, muttering to himself, I actually made an error in judgment. This battleship is actually at the Heavenly God grade. Previously, he had heard that there was a boundless divine stone in the Five Elements world where Ji Tianqing was. This object was extremely wondrous, and it was extremely beneficial to deities as well. His master was very interested in it, and he ordered a thorough investigation. Now, it seems that Ji Tianqing's battleship was most likely added with a large number of boundless divine stones to reach the Heavenly God grade and possess such power. As his voice trailed off, the purple-robed elder said in a deep voice, Don't worry, Your Highness, I've already made the necessary arrangements. The 12 divine generals will control the Black Dragon battleship, and lock onto Ji Tianqing's battleship. After this battle, we will definitely capture his battleship and bring it back to planet Heaven to study. Tianshu nodded slightly and did not say much. At the same time, the cabin door of Tianqing's battleship opened, and 3 handsome and peerless figures stepped out. The one in front was dressed in a white robe, handsome and domineering. It was Ji Tianqing. The 2 women behind him, one in a white dress, and the other in a fiery red dress, were as beautiful as fairies. The 3 of them walked to the bow of the battleship and stood still. Ji Tianqing looked at Tianshu from afar and said indifferently, "Tianshu, how dare you and the left and right protectors come to the Black Dragon Star area to intercept me? Aren't you overconfident? If your father doesn't show up, the 3 of you might as well surrender and admit defeat. Otherwise, when you die in the starry sky and beg for mercy, it will be too late." His voice rolled across the void and reached the Black Dragon battleship. Ji Tianqing's tone was calm and did not sound like he was bluffing. Instead, it contained certainty and strong confidence. The left and right protectors frowned and looked angry. Tianshu also raised his eyebrows and sneered. That's more like it. This is the rumored lawless, arrogant Ji Tianqing. Only in this way can I feel a sense of accomplishment when I kill you with my own hands and wring your neck." After saying that, Tianshu slowly raised his broad palms. Divine power that could destroy heaven and earth was brewing in his body. "Ji Tianqing, I'll give you 3 breaths of time to say your last words." As soon as he finished speaking, a dazzling white light shone between his broad palms. His body emitted an invisible aura that swept across the void for 3,000 miles. After 3 breaths of time, his divine power would reach its peak, and he would unleash his most powerful attack. Ji Tianqing sneered disapprovingly. "Let alone 3 breaths of time. Even if I give you 6 hours, you won't be able to change the outcome of your defeat. Then you can go to hell." Tianshu suddenly shouted angrily. He raised his palms and slapped toward Ji Tianqing. Exquisite illusory space break. Instantly, 2 overwhelming beams of hazy white light carrying the ever-changing power of space blasted toward Ji Tianqing, Yunyao and Ji Ku. Each beam of white light was 10 miles long and 10,000 feet wide. There were millions of vortexes and spatial cracks in them. Once enveloped by the white light, they would be cut by the power of space. Apart from heavenly gods who could withstand it, all living beings below heavenly gods would be shredded into pieces. Only heavenly gods could control the space law. However, Tianshu was known as the #1 genius in the universe. He had also been enlightened and taught by the upper realm deities, so he had mastered the space law in advance. Therefore, he was full of confidence. However, Ji Tianqing raised his hands without a change in expression. He waved his palms and shot out 36 blazing white light blades. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Each light blade was condensed with space divine power. They were 10,000 feet long and extremely sharp, as if they could cut through everything in the world. In the next moment, the 36 light blades struck the 2 beams of white light. A cracking sound was heard. The light blades and the white light collapsed at the same time, bursting into millions of pieces. After an earth-shattering storm, millions of vortexes bloomed in the void within 10,000 miles before quickly dissipating. Tianshu's ultimate killer move was easily neutralized by Ji Tianqing just like that. Seeing this, Tianshu's expression became serious. A cold light flashed in his eyes. As expected, those white light blades were released by him. They were not the power of the warship. That damn Ji Tianqing. He has mastered the space divine power too. This thought flashed through his mind. Tianshu stepped into the void and moved 100 miles in a flash. He waved his fist and charged toward Ji Tianqing. Skyfall strike. Tianshu raised his fists high. His entire body emitted a divine light that shot into the sky. He was like a deity descending to the mortal world as he charged toward Ji Tianqing. Chapter 2695. Tianshu took the initiative to attack and arrived in front of Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't move an inch from his original spot. When the purple fists were right in front of him, he raised his fists and punched out. Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. 2 phantoms of dragons and elephants as large as mountains instantly blasted the sky pivot, exploding with a loud bang that shook the universe. Boom! The purple fists were shattered on the spot. Tianshu was also sent flying back and crashed into the Black Dragon battleship. The left and right protectors were shocked. They hurried to catch Tianshu and asked about the situation with concern. "Your Highness, are you hurt? Your Highness, are you okay?" Tianshu was shocked and angry. He shouted coldly, "Get out of my way. I have never been defeated in the universe. How can I be defeated by Ji Tianxing?" At the same time, Yunyao held the divine sword and Jiku waved the divine spear. Divine light filled the sky as they attacked the left and right protectors. The left and right protectors could only take out their Kenshin weapons and fight with all their might. Bam 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 bam. With a muffled explosion, a dazzling 5-colored divine light exploded in the void. The left and right protectors were sent flying at the same time and landed in the void 300 miles away. Yunyao and Jiku took advantage of the situation and attacked with the divine sword and the divine spear. How can they be so powerful? Damn it! It's one thing for Ji Tianxing to be very strong, but why are these two women not weaker than Ji Tianxing? The left and right guardians were filled with shock. They hurriedly retreated to avoid the attack and joined forces to cast a spell to resist. Boom boom boom. The four of them fought fiercely in the void. Divine light covered the sky and there was a series of loud explosions. The four of them were all true gods. Their figures flashed in the void and they were as fast as the aurora. In just a few seconds, they had shifted the battlefield and fought their way into the depths of the void. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and Tianshu also left the battleship and flew into the void to begin their battle. There were 12 immortal generals and hundreds of guards on the Black Dragon battleship. Seeing that everyone was engaged in a fierce battle, they carried out the task given by the left custodian. Everyone worked together to control the battleship, ferociously attacking Tianxing's battleship, releasing a dense rain of divine light beams. White Dragon remained calm and controlled the Tianxing battleship in an orderly manner to avoid the bombardment of the divine light. At the same time, he also controlled the battleship to launch a counterattack, releasing dazzling golden light pillars that covered the sky and earth. Haha, you're trying to hit a stone with an egg. Ji Tianxing sneered disdainfully. His body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky. Heavenly dragon body. The next moment, he expanded and became a golden giant 100 feet tall. Tianshu used to be a dozen times taller than him, but now he was 10 times taller. He reached out his left hand like an eagle's claw and locked Tianshu's ankle. His right fist carried the power to crush everything and hit Tianshu's knee. Crack! There was a crisp cracking sound. Tianshu's knee shattered and countless golden fragments and blood splashed out. His entire right leg was bent at a strange angle, and the dazzling golden light immediately disappeared. With a wave of his left hand, Ji Tianxing tossed the heavenly pivot away, sending it tumbling 100 miles away. The excruciating pain made Tianshu frown and he couldn't help but let out a groan. He was shocked and furious. He yelled in disbelief, "He's twice as fast and powerful as me? That's impossible." Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to chase after Lin Yun and punched out with his fists. Tianshu immediately used a divine art to cut off the pain. He raised his fists with all his might and punched at Ji Tianxing. Boom! The four fists collided and there was an earth-shattering explosion that spread for 10,000 miles. Tianshu, who was small in size, was knocked away. 4 of the knuckles on his huge and sturdy fists had been shattered, and his divine bones were shattered into pieces. Luckily, he couldn't feel the pain in his body anymore, so it didn't affect his battle. Also, he had inherited the special body of the Heaven Punisher, and had been baptized by the Divine Spirit. His recovery ability was insane. His shattered knees and knuckles were recovering at a visible speed. You like close-range combat, right? Again. At this moment, Ji Tianxing shouted coldly with an expressionless face. He caught up with Tianshu again and attacked with his fists and legs. Swish, swish, swish. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing's punches and kicks left a series of afterimages in the air, and enveloped Tianshu. Tianshu was furious and could only block and counterattack with all his might. Bang bang. Boom 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 boom. The two of them were entangled and clashed over 100 times in an instant. There was a deafening explosion. Chapter 2696. A full quarter of an hour. Ji Tianqing and Tian Shu had been fighting in close quarters. The two figures were entangled, chasing and flashing in the void, overlapping and separating. During this period, the two of them had swung their fists and legs hundreds of thousands of times, exchanging tens of thousands of blows. The battlefield had shifted close to 10,000 miles. The airwaves produced by the clashes and collisions formed shockwaves that spread in the void, rolling up a destructive storm. Such a fierce and tough battle was unbearable for any true god. Not only did it consume a lot of energy, but it also tested one's consciousness, reaction, judgment, defense, and speed. If it were any other true god, they would have been smashed into pieces and turned into ashes. However, Ji Tianqing and Tian Shu both had rare and special divine bodies that were comparable to supreme-grade true god weapons. Even so, the battle that lasted for a quarter of an hour still ended. The two figures separated and faced each other in the void, separated by 100 miles. Ji Tianqing was safe and sound, standing in the void with a cold expression, his chest rising and falling as he panted slightly. His 1,000-foot divine body was unscathed, but his long hair was messy. Golden light flashed all over his body, and his power was a little chaotic. On the other hand, Tian Shu's outcome was very tragic. His majestic body that was 100 feet tall had long been twisted and deformed. He was hunched over like a lobster, panting violently. His body was full of dents and cracks, hundreds of joints were shattered, and dark purple blood seeped out. His entire face, in particular, had been beaten beyond recognition. It was a mess of flesh and blood. It had a flat mouth and two large eyeballs, which looked particularly ferocious in the middle of a pile of bloody and rotten flesh. Moreover, Tian Shu had used up too much of his divine power, and his strength had weakened by 40%. Even if he continued to fight, he was no match for Ji Tianqing, and would only be beaten up even more miserably. However, Tian Shu's recovery ability and vitality had reached an extremely abnormal level. Even if he was severely injured, his life was not in danger. Even if he was blasted into pieces, he could use the divine power bestowed by the upper realm deities to be reborn from a drop of blood. He could no longer feel the pain of his physical body. At this moment, he only felt endless humiliation and anger. Goddamn bastard! Tian Shu glared viciously at Ji Tianqing and growled with a hoarse voice. The space laws, the heaven-punishing divine power, the water divine spells, and close combat skills are all useless against him. What kind of monster was he? How could he be so powerful? His true strength is far beyond the 9th level true god realm. He has already surpassed Father and is comparable to a celestial god powerhouse. Even though he couldn't believe that there was such a terrifying existence in the mortal world, he still couldn't believe it. However, the truth was right in front of him, and he had no choice but to accept this result. When he thought of this, a thought flashed through his mind. He remembered what the heaven-punishing emperor had said many years ago. Tian Shu, I've always been proud of you. Your talent and aptitude are unparalleled, surpassing all the martial artists in the 3,000 worlds. You are the undisputed #1 genius. Even His Excellency the Divine King thought highly of you and took you in as his last disciple. He taught you all kinds of divine abilities and supreme skills. Father has no regrets in this life to have such a monstrous son like you. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing had said the same thing to Tian Shu in a secret room. However, the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's expression and eyes showed no sign of relief or joy. Instead, they were filled with worry. Tian Shu was puzzled. He asked the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing why he looked so gloomy and pale. The great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not explain why his son looked so pale. He only said earnestly, however, the 3,000 worlds are too vast. There are still too many unknown secrets in the world. It was not until I met Ji Tianqing, a young human from a weak world, that I realized that the universe is limitless and that miracles are common. He is the only genius I've seen in my life who can be compared to you. In fact, his talent, aptitude, and means are even better than yours. I hope you won't be arrogant and impatient. If you meet him one day, don't underestimate him. After hearing this, Sky Pivot was full of doubts. He asked several times, wanting to know more about Ji Tianqing's secrets. However, the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not say anything. He sent Tianshu away, locked the secret room, and went into seclusion to cultivate. From then on, Tianshu remembered the name Ji Tianqing. His natural desire to win and his pride gave birth to a strong fighting spirit and fighting spirit. He started to collect information about Ji Tianqing. He decided to leave the planet of Heaven Punishing and kill Ji Tianqing in person. He needed a glorious and fierce head-on battle. He needed to defeat Ji Tianqing with his own hands and trample him under his feet. Only in this way could he prove that he was the real #1 genius in the universe. Therefore, Tianshu sneaked to the Black Dragon Star Zone, while the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing was in seclusion. He made the decision without the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's consent. He wanted to act alone, but the left and right protectors learned about it. The left and right protectors insisted on following him to carry out the plan and fight against Ji Tianqing together. If Tianshu did not agree, the left and right protectors would knock on the door, wake up the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing, and report the matter to him. Tianshu had no choice but to agree. Today, Tianshu's wish was fulfilled. He successfully arrived at the Black Dragon Star Zone and intercepted Ji Tianqing. They fought fiercely in the universe. The battle went as he wished. It was a fierce head-on battle without any fancy moves or techniques. It was a head-on battle. However, the result of the battle made him both angry and ashamed. His self-esteem was severely damaged. He, who had always been arrogant and invincible, finally tasted defeat. It was terrible. His heart was filled with resentment and anger. Only now did Tianshu believe the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing's words. At the same time, he could guess why the great Emperor of Heaven Punishing did not look well. He must have been seriously injured. And Ji Tianqing had injured him. Just then Ji Tianqing stepped across the void and walked over at a moderate pace. Tianshu, I've heard that the Heaven Punishing clan praised you as the #1 genius in the universe. You even call yourself the Astral War God. Today I'm disappointed to see you. The Heaven Punishing clan is narrow-minded. You are just an arrogant frog at the bottom of the well. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly with a faint smile on his lips. Space laws, Heaven Punishing divine power, water divine skills, close combat. You've tried everything, but you failed without exception. What else do you have? Use them all. Otherwise, you won't even have the chance to regret it. Every sentence and every word was like a sharp knife stabbing into Tianshu's heart. However, these were all facts. He could not refute them. He was filled with grief and indignation. He roared angrily and took out a 30-meter-long ancient halberd. Ji Tianqing, don't be so arrogant. When I take out the sea god's halberd, I am the real astral war god. You are destined to be killed by my sea god's halberd and die in the void. And I am the real #1 genius in the universe. Chapter 2697. Tianshu held the black halberd that was more than 10 feet long and thick. His blood was boiling. The fighting spirit and will to fight that had disappeared previously had returned, filling his chest once again. The sea god halberd was his natal divine weapon. At the same time, the Empress had spent decades to create this heavenly god-level weapon for him. The Empress was the saintess of the Water Spirit clan, and the reincarnation of a divine lord from the upper world. Not only did she have hundreds of divine skills, but she also had countless ways to forge heavenly god-level and monarch-grade divine weapons. The Heaven Punishers had collected countless resources and treasures when they conquered the various star zones. This included the fragments and remains of divine weapons from the ancient era. The Empress had used the remains of countless primordial divine weapons to create this halberd, and named it the Sea God Halberd. Ever since Tianshu had obtained this heavenly god-level weapon, he had only used it a few times. After all, he could easily kill 99% of true gods with his bare hands. Only Ji Tianqing could force him to use the Sea God Halberd. Sea God's Fury. Tianshu didn't waste any time. He roared hoarsely and gripped the Neptune halberd with both of his hands, releasing a sky-covering blue divine light. Boundless blue light swept across the void like a shocking wave, and it was about to drown Ji Tianqing. Tianshu was severely injured and only had 60% of his strength left. However, the sea god halberd was so powerful that it could threaten Ji Tianqing's life. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing was still calm and collected. He put his palms together and activated his vast divine power. He used the law of earth and released the endless power of the earth. Heavens break. As he shouted, endless brown divine light condensed into a 10,000-mile-long mountain range in the void between him and the sky pivot. The mountain range was 3,000 miles wide, 10,000 miles long, and 10,000 feet tall. It was majestic and majestic. Moreover, the mountain range wasn't made of ordinary earth and rocks. It contained incomparably sturdy metals and godly stones, like a huge natural shield wall. Boom! Boom! In the next instant, the azure blue divine light that blotted out the sky smashed fiercely onto the 5,000 kilometers mountain range, and a muffled bang resounded throughout the world. The blue light that filled the sky was blocked by the mountain range, unable to cross even half a step. Tianshu's expression changed. He swung the Neptune's halberd again, pushing its power to the limit. Under the amplification of his divine power, the blue light that filled the sky became even more turbulent, its power astonishing. However, the mountain range remained unmoved, firmly blocking the azure divine light's attack. Sky Pivot clenched his teeth and urged his divine power to strengthen the azure divine light. Ji Tianqing calmly extended his palms, using the laws of the earth to maintain the mountain range. Both sides were in a deadlock just like that, competing to see whose divine power was more vigorous, whose strength was more profound. The result was obvious. Ji Tianqing had long reached peak true god. Furthermore, his strength was strengthened more than 9 times. While Dubhe was only peak true god, still very far from half-step celestial deity realm. He was heavily injured again, and his strength was weakened by 40%. His divine power was also greatly depleted. After the deadlock lasted for 100 breaths of time, Dubhe could not hold on any longer. The surging azure divine light receded like a receding tide and quickly dissipated. Ji Tianqing also waved his hand to remove the mountain range. A black light flashed in his right hand, and he wielded the sword of burial of heaven. He crossed 5 miles in a step, his clothes fluttering as he flew toward Tianshu. He shouted in a deep voice, "Tianshu, don't be stubborn anymore. Just give up and let me capture you." As he spoke, he formed a sword seal with his left hand and held the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. He used a supreme sword technique, rising sword of life. As he shouted coldly, the sword of burial of heaven released a dazzling golden light. It swayed in the air, drawing a dazzling sword light that was 100 miles long. Swoosh! This sword's aura was elegant and otherworldly, without the slightest bit of worldly energy. It did not look like a killing move for a decisive battle. It also did not look like a killing move that could destroy heaven and earth. It looked more like a wise man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life and seen through the vanity of the world. He held a brush in his hand and used the starry sky as a painting scroll. It was a freehand landscape painting. It contained the vicissitudes of life, vanity, calmness, tranquility, and loftiness. It was like a god looking down on mortals or an expert looking down on ants. It was quite indifferent. However, it was this seemingly harmless sword strike that caused Tianshu's eyes to widen in shock, revealing a look of horror. With his strength and experience, he could not see through this sword, nor could he figure out the mystery behind it. He only felt. This sword seemed to have flown from the sky. It was the brush of a god. It was mysterious and magical to the extreme. At this critical moment, Tianshu could only grit his teeth and wave the Neptune halberd with both hands, releasing endless azure divine light. The divine light formed a gigantic ice blue shield, protecting him. In the next instant, the dazzling golden sword light slashed into the ice blue shield. Kaboom! With a deafening shattering sound, the ice blue shield was broken by the sword light on the spot, and a huge crack was formed in the shield. Countless cracks appeared on both sides of the crack, and soon covered the entire shield. Kacha-kacha sounds of shattering could be heard. and the huge ice-blue shield soon fell apart. The 100-mile sword light dimmed a bit and its power weakened a bit, but it continued to slash at Tianshu. Tianshu was shocked. He could only hold the Neptune halberd above his head in desperation. Kaboom! The 100-mile sword light hit the Neptune halberd and let out an earth-shattering sound. The terrifying force of the impact sent Tianshu flying. He was still in the air, but he was already spitting out blood. Dozens of cracks appeared on his body and blood spilled everywhere. His injuries were even more serious and his body was hunched over. He was no longer as majestic and domineering as before. Only when he was sent flying 100 miles away did he manage to neutralize the impact and stop in the void. At this moment, Ji Tianqing chased after him with his sword and shouted coldly, "Tianshu, it's time for you to die." In fact, Ji Tianqing did not plan to kill Tianshu directly. He wanted to capture Tianshu and interrogate him with torture, or use soul-searching techniques to find out some secrets. For example, the true identity and intentions of the upper realm deities, and other secrets. Tianshu held the Neptune halberd with both hands and panted violently. Blood flowed out of his body. However, he stared at Ji Tianqing stubbornly and sneered. "Ha ha ha. Ji Tianqing, you underestimate me. So what if you can defeat me? I'm immortal, you'll never be able to kill me." As he spoke, Tianshu's body lit up with a dense blue light and quickly healed his injuries. The water-type divine power had a powerful healing effect. He also had the 7 stars glorious young divine body. It was indeed difficult to kill him. To any true god, he was an extremely troublesome character. However, Ji Tianqing did not find it troublesome at all. He even smiled playfully. "Immortal? What a joke. If I'm not wrong, you've also been baptized by the divine light and jumped from the crossing calamity realm to the martial sage realm. You haven't gone through the 9 tribulations nor been struck by the divine lightning. Now I'll help you make up for your regrets, and let you have a taste of being struck by lightning." NBSP. Hurry up and read it. Chapter 2698. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Tianshu's expression changed. Indeed, he was a genius that reigned supreme over the past and present, a genius that was rarely seen in 10,000 years. He had perfectly combined the bloodlines of the heaven punishers and the water spirits, and he had been taught by the divine king. His combat strength was outstanding and he had dominated the world. His body, divine soul, and bloodline were perfect. He had almost no flaws. But, however, he knew very well that he had a fatal weakness. That was, he hadn't gone through the 9-level heavenly tribulations. But Ji Tianqing knew it. Tianshu immediately frowned, showing a strong vigilance in his eyes. "Ji Tianqing, what do you want?" Ji Tianqing put his left hand behind his back, and held the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. He sneered. "Tianshu, how do you want to be cooked? Bastard!" Tianshu was furious and roared, "I swear that I'll cut you into pieces, skin you, and pull out your tendons." Before he could finish, Ji Tianqing had swung the sword of burial of heaven and shot out 9 5-colored sword auras, 5-colored divine lightning. The 9,000-foot-long sword auras were formed by the divine lightning and divine fire of the 4 elements. They were surrounded by lightning and looked like dragons. In the next moment, the 9 divine lightning swords arrived in front of Tianshu and drowned his figure. His divine soul was locked and he had nowhere to run. At this critical moment, he could only wave the Neptune halberd and release a shield to protect himself. Boom, 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 boom. The 9 divine lightning sword auras hit the azure shield and made a series of earth-shattering noises. In the blink of an eye, the blue light shield was smashed to pieces, and shards of it flew everywhere. Then the violent lightning engulfed Tianshu's figure. Kaboom! Crackle, crackle. Divine fire and lightning flashed. The lightning arcs were like dragons and the loud noises shook the sky. Sky pivot screams were mixed in with the black shards and ashes that filled the sky. It was Tianshu's robe, hair and flesh, which had been turned into charcoal by the divine lightning. After a few breaths, the 5-colored divine lightning that enveloped Dubhe gradually dissipated. Tianshu's figure appeared. This time his injuries were terrible to the extreme. It was truly too horrible to look at. The 30-meter-tall body had shrunk to a size of 30 meters. It had completely turned into black charcoal and was still emitting black smoke. He no longer looked like a human. He had turned into a lump of charred flesh, like a charred wooden block. It was both tragic and hilarious. He convulsed incessantly, unable to make a sound and unable to escape. The only thing he could be proud of was that he was still alive. I was a little too harsh and roasted you to a crisp. Ji Tianqing grinned coldly and reached out his eagle claw-like left hand to grab the sky pivot. He wanted to capture Tian Shu and slowly interrogate him for information. The giant golden palm was about to grab the sky pivot. However, right at this critical moment, a blinding white light burst forth from the sea god's halberd and swallowed the heavenly pivot. Swoosh! The sky pivot disappeared instantly. It was swallowed by the sea god's halberd and protected. At the same time, the sea god's halberd also disappeared from the void. It unleashed a powerful spatial fluctuation and instantly teleported 1,000 miles away, escaping into the void. The heavenly divine artifact that the queen goddess had spent so much effort to create was indeed amazing. It could protect the sky pivot at the critical moment and bring him out of danger. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and a cold light flashed across his eyes. Swish! Without hesitation, he teleported 1,000 miles away and caught up with the sea god's halberd. However, the sea god's halberd was a real heavenly divine artifact. It was extremely powerful. It teleported 1,000 miles away again and left Ji Tianqing behind. If it was an ordinary true god, he would not be able to teleport twice in a row. He could only look at the halberd and sigh. However, Ji Tianqing was special. He immediately teleported 1,000 miles away and caught up with the sea god's halberd again. The sea god's halberd was about to teleport again. Ji Tianqing used his heaven-seizing palm and released a giant dragon claw to grab the sea god's halberd. However, just as the dragon claw was about to grab the sea god's halberd, a burning purple ball of light rushed out from the side. Your Highness, run! We will cover you. In the dazzling purple ball of light was the left guardian in a purple robe. He was already covered in wounds and blood. His hair was disheveled and 2 of his legs were broken. Even though he was severely injured, he still burned his life force to unleash his greatest strength and speed. In order to cover the sea god's halberd's escape, he charged at the heaven-seizing dragon claw without caring about his own safety. Boom! There was a loud, muffled explosion. The left guardian was smashed into pieces by the heaven-seizing dragon claw and exploded into endless purple flames that spread out in the void. The heaven-seizing dragon claw was blocked and paused for 1/3 of an instant. Seizing this opportunity, the sea god's halberd disappeared and teleported 1,000 miles away. Ji Tianqing panicked and his face was as cold as ice. He did not care about the consequences and was not afraid of the backlash from teleporting continuously. He was about to teleport 1,000 miles again to chase after the sea god's halberd. But at this moment, another ball of dazzling purple flames rushed out from the side, brutally crashing into him. Ji Tianqing, I will fight you to the death. As long as the starry sky is not destroyed, the heavens will be eternal. In the purple flames was the left guardian in a green robe. He was also severely injured. He was missing an arm and a leg and was covered in wounds. He was already at the end of his rope, even though his strength was only at the 7th level of the true god realm. However, he had the mentality of perishing together with Ji Tianqing. He charged at Ji Tianqing and detonated himself. Once Ji Tianqing was hit, he would be severely injured even if he did not die. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to enter the sword of burial of heaven. Swoosh! With a flash of light, he entered the world inside the sword. Only the sword of burial of heaven was left floating in the void. At the same time, the left guardian rushed to the sword of burial of heaven and exploded. Boom! The purple fireball exploded, bursting forth with boundless purple flames, forming a massive mushroom cloud in the air. The earth-shattering sound spread through the void within a radius of 30,000 miles. The destructive purple flames swept through the void for 30,000 miles before gradually dissipating. The sword of burial of heaven was at the center of the explosion and took the brunt of the terrifying power. However, it was a heavenly divine artifact. The self-destruction of a true god powerhouse was not a threat to it. It was only blasted a few hundred miles away. It was not damaged. A moment later, the purple flames that swept through the void dissipated. Ji Tianqing left the world inside the sword and returned to the void. He looked in the direction that the sea god's halberd had fled and sighed regretfully. The few breaths of time he had wasted was enough for the sea god's halberd to escape tens of thousands of miles away. If he chased after it now, he could only teleport a few thousand miles at most before his divine body suffered a backlash. If he used the heavenly star shuttle, he would directly jump to the nearest star. It would be even more impossible to find the sea god's halberd. The left and right protector's sacrifice had saved Tianshu's life. Chapter 2699. Not long after, Yunyao and Jiku flew back to Ji Tianqing's side. Both of them were travel-worn. Their hair was a little messy, and there were beads of sweat on their foreheads. However, both of them were unharmed and unharmed. They had the upper hand in the previous battle. They had completely suppressed the left and right protectors. Fortunately, the left and right protectors were old monsters who had cultivated for thousands of years. Their divine powers were extremely vast, and they had mastered hundreds of divine powers and ultimate skills. They had many life-saving trump cards. That was why they were not killed by Yunyao and Jiku on the spot. They were only severely injured and on the verge of death. They desperately tried to escape. In the end, they sacrificed themselves to cover Tianshu's escape. Tianqing, what's the situation? Did the left and right protector self-destruct? Big brother Tianqing, are the left and right protectors all dead? Did you kill Tianshu too? Yunyao and Jiku looked at Ji Tianqing anxiously and asked about the result. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, the left and right protectors sacrificed themselves to cover Tianshu's escape. Tianshu was severely injured by me, but he escaped under the protection of the sea god halberd. Yunyao and Jiku were stunned. Then they looked regretful. The sea god halberd? What divine weapon is that? Ji Tianqing explained, that's Tianshu's natal divine weapon. It should be a heavenly god-grade weapon that the celestial empress had made for him. Not only does it have the aura of a primordial divine weapon, but it also has many heavenly god-grade restrictions. Yunyao and Jiku nodded. They were slightly regretful. Unfortunately, we didn't kill Tianshu this time. He'll be troublesome in the future. If only we could capture him. We'd definitely be able to dig out the secrets of the Heaven Punisher race and the god behind them. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, although it's a pity that we didn't kill Tianshu, I've severely injured him. However, since I have severely injured him, he will definitely escape back to planet Heaven Crusher and recuperate in seclusion for 100 years. Besides, the left and right protectors are all dead. Emperor Heaven Punisher has lost 2 capable subordinates. Hearing his advice, Yunyao and Jiku's brows finally relaxed. That's right. If we can continue to weaken the Heaven Punisher race, our chances of winning will increase. Tianshu is actually hailed as the #1 genius in the starry skies, and here I was wondering how strong he was. I never imagined that he would actually be completely suppressed by Big Brother Tianqing and beaten half to death, and he could only flee in a sorry state. Truly laughable. Ji Tianqing shook his head lightly and said, although Tianshu is not my match, his talent and strength are indeed the most monstrous among the martial artists that I have ever seen. If we don't get rid of this person as soon as possible, in another 200 or 300 years, he will definitely become a great threat to us. Yunyao said in a low voice, if that's the case, then the next time we meet him, we must surround and kill him with all our might. Jiku said with a smile, in another 200 or 300 years, at most a few decades, we will reach planet Heaven Crusher and exterminate the Heaven Punisher race. Everyone chatted for a while, and the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Ji Tianqing looked around and asked with a frown, where is Bai Long? Why isn't he back yet? Could he be in trouble? Don't worry, I will send a message to ask him. Jiku quickly took out a source stone jade slip and sent it to Bai Long. Whoosh. The source stone jade slip flew into the void and disappeared immediately. The 3 of them stood in the void and quietly circulated their chi, waiting patiently. After about 10 breaths, a jade slip flew back to Jiku. Jike picked up the communication jade slip and read its contents with his divine sense. Bailong is fine for now. He has gained the upper hand and is chasing after Tianshu's warship. Ji Tianqing thought for a while and said, "Tell Bailong that we have killed the left and right protectors and that Tianshu has escaped with heavy injuries. Tell him to consider the situation and decide whether to chase after us. If he is not confident, then don't waste time and come back as soon as possible." Okay. Jike responded and quickly entered his message into the communication jade slip and sent it to Bailong. After about 20 breaths, the communication jade slip flew back. Jike read the contents of the jade slip and said to Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao, "Bailong said that Tianshu's warship is a heavenly god-grade warship and that its defense is very strong. He won't be able to catch up with that warship in a short time and it will be very difficult for him to break through it. Therefore, he doesn't want to waste time and will meet up with us immediately." Therefore, Ji Tianqing and the other two waited patiently. An hour later, Bailong drove Tianqing's warship back at lightning speed. The three of them boarded the warship. When Ji Tianqing saw Bailong, he said with a mocking expression, "Looks like you guys fought very fiercely. You chased after him for at least 200,000 miles. Bailong smiled embarrassedly and explained, "Master, I was thinking for you guys. I tried my best to drive the Black Dragon warship away, so that it wouldn't affect your battle. However, the Black Dragon warship's defense is too strong and its power is not weak. I can't break through it in a short time. It looks like I have to find some time to have a good chat with the Golden Mountain King. I have to urge him to develop an even more powerful divine cannon as soon as possible." Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "We'll talk about this later. Let's go to the world ahead first." Okay. Chapter 2700. After that, Ji Tianqing continued to control the five-element world to travel around the Black Dragon star zone. Wherever they went, they killed the Heaven Punishers and saved one world after another. If they encountered a suitable and resource-rich planet, Ji Tianqing would refine it. Year after year, time flew by. Before they knew it, 10 years had passed. During this time, they had saved more than 40 worlds and killed more than 100,000 Heaven Punishers and tens of millions of Heaven Punishers. Ji Tianqing had also refined 4 planets, and his strength had increased by about 5 times. Of course, the 5-element world's size had also increased, and its power had also increased. The resources and spiritual qi in the 5-element world had also become richer. The living beings on the various continents were also rapidly growing stronger. Spring of the 11th year. The 5-element world had arrived at the core of the Black Dragon star zone. The Black Dragon star. From afar, the Black Dragon star with a diameter of 800 million miles was quietly suspended in the void. The entire surface of the star was enveloped by a rich golden light. However, there were countless black light ribbons in the golden light barrier, like thousands of black divine dragons, circling the entire star. That was how the Black Dragon star got its name. When they were still a few hundred million miles away, the 5-element world started to slow down. When they were more than 100 million miles away from the Black Dragon star, the 5-element world gradually stopped. To prevent any accidents, Ji Tianqing only brought White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts to the Black Dragon star. Yun Yao, Ji Kuo, Ji Wuhan, and Ji Wushuang stayed in the 5-element world, still cultivating in seclusion in the divine tower. Swoosh! Tianqing's battleship cut through the void and headed straight for the Black Dragon star. Along the way, White Dragon and Qianyu discussed with anticipation. "We've been in the Black Dragon star zone for more than a decade and saved more than 60 worlds. We've also collected a huge amount of cultivation resources. However, only 10% of the resources have reached the divine level. The remaining 90% of the resources have been integrated into the 5-element world to transform a few continents. The Black Dragon star zone is the core of the entire star zone, and it has been occupied by the Heaven Punishers for more than 100 years. There must be a huge amount of divine-level resources stored there." White Dragon seemed to be able to imagine mountains of divine-level treasures and resources, shining with dazzling light. His eyes shone brightly as he rubbed his palms together, looking impatient. Qianyu also smiled and nodded. Previously in a certain world, I discovered 2 interesting ancient artifacts and gained a lot of benefits. On this trip to Black Dragon Star, he hoped to obtain some interesting things. Old Bai, don't fight with me when the time comes. Before the white dragon could answer, the black dragon added in a low, muffled voice, count me in too. Old White, you're not allowed to snatch it. Bah, am I that kind of person? Disdain was written all over the white dragon's face as he said proudly, I was once a monarch god who dominated the god realm and suppressed tens of thousands of gods. Why would I be interested in such trash? Qian Yu revealed a triumphant smile and said, that's good. Don't slap yourself in the face when the time comes and say that it smells good. Seeing them laughing and fooling around, Luli revealed a thoughtful expression. After a moment of silence, she finally said to Ji Tianqing, Master, the Heaven Punisher race is deeply rooted in the Black Dragon Star area. They are very powerful. However, there were 300 worlds in the entire star field. Over the past decade, we've only rescued about 60 worlds. The Heaven Punishers in many worlds got the news in advance and fled with large amounts of resources. We've missed them many times. Do you think it's possible that the Heaven Punisher race guarding the Black Dragon Star area has retreated in advance? Before Ji Tianqing could answer, the White Dragon hastily denied it. That's impossible. The Black Dragon Star area is the headquarters of the Northern Expedition Fleet. The Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal has been here for more than 100 years. How could he give it up? Even if he's afraid of Master's reputation and wants to escape with his soldiers and large amounts of resources, he needs the Heaven Punisher race's permission. The Heaven Punisher race went through so much trouble to occupy the Black Dragon Star area. How could they give it up just like that? Yes, Old Bai's analysis is very reasonable. Qian Yu quickly nodded in agreement. After all, both she and the White Dragon wanted to make a name for themselves in the Black Dragon Star area. How could they accept such an outcome? The Black Dragon thought for a moment and nodded to show that it was impossible. Only Azurite remained stubborn. She calmly analyzed, the Southern Expedition Fleet and the Eastern Expedition Fleet have been destroyed by us. The 3 marshals have also been killed. The left and right protectors are dead. Tianshu was severely injured by Master and fled back to the Heaven Punisher race. Now the Heaven Punisher race has fewer and fewer people they can use. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal insists on staying on the Black Dragon Star area, he will be killed by us soon. In another 10 years, the entire Black Dragon Star area will be rescued, and the Northern Expedition Fleet will be destroyed. The Heaven Punisher race's main force will be nibbled away by us until they perish. If you were the Heaven Punisher race, would you sit back and watch this happen? The White Dragon and Qian Yu were speechless. That's true. The White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts fell silent. Their eyes were fixed on Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was piloting the battleship toward the Black Dragon Star area. He had heard the White Dragon and the divine beast's conversation clearly. Sensing everyone's gaze, he did not turn around. He said calmly, your analysis is reasonable. However, the exact situation depends on the Heaven Punisher race's decision. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal insists on staying on the Black Dragon Star area, it means that the Heaven Punisher race is still recuperating in seclusion. Moreover, the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal knows that we are coming. He will gather all his elite soldiers and fight us to the death. If the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal leaves the Black Dragon Star area and we fail to find him, it means the Heaven Punisher race has come out of seclusion. Also, the Heaven Punisher race will gather his most powerful forces to ambush and attack us. Or, he will withdraw all his forces to the Heaven Punisher race and fight us there. The White Dragon and the 4 divine beasts were stunned. Then they looked surprised. Wow! Master, you had a hunch and predicted the Heaven Punisher race's thoughts. You were able to deduce so much just based on whether the Northern Expedition Fleet's marshal is on the Black Dragon Star area or not. Olji, you are amazing. No matter what the Heaven Punisher race does, we are not afraid. After all, we are powerful. We just have to fight our way through. They were full of confidence and anticipation for the future. They were not worried at all. Soon, 12 days passed. The Tianqing battleship flew across the void and landed on the Black Dragon Star area's divine light barrier. Ji Tianqing used his divine consciousness to check the barrier. He found that the energy waves on the divine light barrier were normal. He then used his divine eye mystic technique to check the barrier again. However, he did not find anything unusual. The divine light barrier was not reinforced. There were no hidden divine arrays. This result made him have a hunch that Black Dragon Star was probably deserted. Soon Ji Tianqing broke the golden light barrier and led the group into the Black Dragon Star area. A few days later, the two of them and the 4 divine beasts had explored many cities and countries. The result was just as Luli had said. The Northern Expedition Fleet's Marshal had already left with his soldiers. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.